Was I expelled from Hogwarts? Greetings, fellow multiversal adventurers. It's an honor to have you back in this saga that has us all hooked. Official channel statement: this story is 100% epic fiction. So please don't attempt real magic, the results aren't guaranteed and insurance won't cover it. The rights to this masterpiece belong entirely to its brilliant original author. We are just a barge sharing it with you. Do you want to keep being part of this amazing community? Join our ninja army of subscribers on YouTube and give this content a like. And for true fans, our Patreon has exclusive ninjutsu waiting for you. Chapter 201: Dumbledore's Brotherly Love and Harmony. After leaving Nocturne Alley, Ralph and Sherry spent the entire day exploring Diagon Alley. During Christmas, Diagon Alley was even more bustling, teeming with wizards, making it incredibly crowded. Various stores were offering special promotions. Ollivander's one shop had a banner that read, "Old ones for kitchen knives." Madame Malkin's robes shop offered a 25% discount on 3 robes. Flourish and Blots gave away a Merlin-shaped doll with every book purchase, looking just like Santa Claus. And the Flying Broomstick shop had various promotions, especially the Nimbus 2001, which had only been on the market for 6 months and had seen a significant price drop, even more drastic than the Nimbus 2000. However, those who wanted to wait could wait a little longer, as prices were likely to become even more affordable, while those who bought it at launch were devastated. Even Gringotts released a special edition Christmas coin, exchangeable 1-to-1 with galleons, but unusable as real galleons, which, according to the fairies, had extremely high collectible value. At night, Diagon Alley became even more lively, filled with fireworks, and flames from magical creatures like dragons and unicorns bloomed overhead. Tonks came again, bringing the bounty for capturing the old witch, but despite the 1,000-gallon reward, he only offered 700 galleons, with the Ministry of Magic deducting 300 for taxes, a shameless 30 out of 70 split. But 700 galleons was enough for a day's splurge, and Ralph and Sherry shopped and played in Diagon Alley until late. It was too late for them to return to Hogwarts, so they stayed overnight at the Leaky Cauldron. The Leaky Cauldron was offering a 3-day, 2-night Christmas package with a double room and breakfast included. Of course, this didn't apply to Ralph and Sherry. They booked 2 separate rooms. The next morning, Ralph took Sherry back to Hogwarts. On their way there, they took the night bus, but on the way back, Sherry firmly resisted this mode of transport. She'd rather ride a flying broomstick back to Hogwarts than experience that awful journey again. Flying was out of the question, of course. There were many ways back to Hogwarts, but the simplest and most convenient was to use the fireplace in the Leaky Cauldron to get to Hogsmeade first. So, they used flue powder to emerge from the fireplace in the Hogshead. The Hogshead was still closed, Aberforth hadn't been working lately. However, even though it wasn't open, he was still alone in the kitchen, wearing an apron and making lamb rolls. On Christmas Day, Ralph had heard Dumbledore say that this was the Hogshead's signature dish, incredibly delicious, a must-try. But Ralph suddenly realized something was wrong. Aberforth had a special affection for goats, even his patroness was a goat. Aberforth had even been accused by the Ministry of Magic of using improper magic on goats, though the specifics of that improper magic were unclear. In short, how could he possibly be making lamb rolls? It's like a dog lover eating dog meat hot pot. Sure enough, Ralph noticed the problem after a short observation. The so-called lamb rolls were actually duck marinated in lamb fat and then seasoned with lamb extract. Typical Aberforth. Using cheap vinegar from the Hufflepuff Lounge entrance and substituting duck for lamb. Is this your special way of taking revenge on society? Duck lovers strongly condemn this. Aberforth, on the other hand, remained calm even after being discovered by Ralph and Sherry, and even asked Ralph to take the added-on duck to his brother for breakfast. Ralph seriously suspected that the added-on duck, like Wallace, would cause diarrhea if eaten. After all, no normal person would put mud in their sauce. Kale and Clay, right? One can only say that the Dumbledore brothers are truly brotherly and respectful. After saying goodbye to Aberforth, they returned to Hogwarts. Shirley, still carrying a large bag of duck meat, asked, "So, should we take this to Professor Dumbledore?" "No, if we eat all this duck, the headmaster will definitely get diarrhea, and then it'll be our problem," Ralph said decisively. "Let's wash off all the sauce and make it into food for the swallowtails. It'll save us some dog food." Shirley glanced at the boy. Ralph was much more thrifty than her. Ralph handed the bag to Shirley, and after parting ways, he went off alone to find the vanishing cabinet. That's right, the other vanishing cabinet corresponding to the one at Borgin Burke's was at Hogwarts. Otherwise, Ralph wouldn't have bothered buying a vanishing cabinet. After all, a single cabinet wouldn't even look good as a bedside table. Ralph finally found the cabinet in Filch's office. A few months ago, on Halloween Eve, Harry was locked up in solitary confinement by Filch. Nico had Peeves throw the vanishing cabinet from the second floor to distract Filch and rescue Harry. Unfortunately, the cabinet was also damaged, and it needed to be repaired to be reused. Repairing such a precious magical item was a difficult task, requiring knowledge of alchemy. Although Ralph had learned runes on Nico's advice, it was just a language, and his foundation in alchemy was still zero. Fortunately, this wasn't a major problem. Ralph could contact Nico for a hands-on lesson. A black leather trunk, a small cabin, a boiling cauldron gurgling, and shelves on both walls displaying various magical materials and bottled potions. Ralph sat at a table, holding a two-way mirror, chatting with Nico. This was a Christmas gift from Nico, intended for their daily communication. Ralph now had two mirrors, one of which was a gift from his sister Margaret, which he had only used a few times before leaving it in the cupboard. Looking at Nico in the mirror, Ralph first mentioned his recent investigation to the old man, then spoke of his trip to Nocturne Alley yesterday. Nico was pleased that the young man was still investigating the 4 prophecies in the Book of Abraham. After listening, he smiled and said, "You're making good progress, but Borgin won't reveal the wizard who bought the portraits," Ralph said softly. "It's all right." The old man picked up an oak pipe, its surface gleaming with a rounded, vermilion sheen from long handling. "I'll go to Borgin Burke's with Albus and give Borgin an irresistible reason." Ralph nodded slightly. With him and Dumbledore involved, at least in Britain, there was nothing they couldn't handle. As for this vanishing cabinet, it's not difficult to repair. "I can guide you now, and you'll be able to fix it by Christmas," Nico said softly. "But that's pointless. I still suggest you first learn the basics of alchemy, and make a few alchemical items according to my alchemy book. In the process, you'll gradually become familiar with the operation. You'll soon be able to repair the vanishing cabinet yourself, without my guidance at all." Chapter 202 Rove's Free Pharmacist. After Ralph finished studying the ancient runes, Nico sent him an alchemy book. Like the ancient runes themselves, this was a book he had written, the only one of its kind in the world, and entirely in ancient runes. Without a foundation in ancient runes, it would be very difficult to understand, but Ralph no longer had that problem. Actually, Nico hadn't expected Ralph to learn ancient runes so quickly. He was even prepared for the boy to only have a superficial understanding before graduation. Nico knew how difficult it was to master ancient runes. He himself had spent over a decade trying to organize the script. It could only be said that the silverfish's magic had indeed brought Ralph many conveniences, giving him a unique advantage in memory. However, alchemy was not so simple to learn. It wasn't a subject that could be mastered through memorization, just like how memorizing physics laws was useless if you couldn't understand their meaning. After ending his conversation with Nico, Ralph began to peruse the alchemy book and prepared to try making his first alchemical item, following the steps. It was an item called the Binding Orb, which would imprison any wizard who touched it. It was an exquisitely crafted alchemical artifact. Even a layman like Ralph could appreciate its ingenious design. Just then, a fluffy head peeked furtively out of the window, seemingly trying to sneak a peek. As Ralph looked up, the head quickly disappeared back into place. The curly brown hair was unmistakable. The boy smiled, holding his alchemy book, and deliberately called out loudly, "Shirley, I've developed the photos of Hermione when she was drunk the other day. Give a copy to Professor McGonagall later." No, Hermione, hiding under the window, jumped up abruptly, her voice trembling. "Please don't give it to her." "Oh, isn't this Miss Granger?" Ralph asked in surprise. "Didn't you say you were hiding in the Gryffindor common room all Christmas?" "I'm here to see Shirley," Hermione said, trying to sound calm. "She wasn't at Hogwarts last night, and I was worried something might have happened to her. I thought you were here to challenge me to a drinking contest," Ralph said with a grin. "That day at the Hog's Head, you told me that people with low alcohol tolerance would be ridden like horses. And you even told Professor McGonagall about your transfiguration grades." You're mistaken. Hermione felt a sudden surge of dead memories attacking her. The girl quickly covered her ears, blushing, and said, "You drank too much that day. I told you you couldn't hold your liquor, and you drank so much mead." Ralph picked up his teacup, took a small sip, and said, "Am I mistaken?" But I have photographic evidence. The girl stared into the boy's eyes, narrowed them, puffed out her cheeks, and said confidently, "You're definitely lying." I asked Sherry, and she said you didn't take any pictures. You don't understand, do you? Memories can be extracted and viewed in the pensieve. Ralph leaned back in his chair, chuckling. I took new pictures, and Sherry doesn't know. Hermione was speechless for a moment. Seeing Ralph's sincere expression, and not seeming to be joking, she was unsure what to do. The girl could only say fiercely, "Give me the photos now." "What did you say?" Ralph picked at his ear and said, louder, "Okay, I'm sorry, Ralph." Hermione clasped her hands together, her little face scrunched up pitifully. "I admit I was a bit loud just now. Give me the photos, that's more like it." Ralph smiled with satisfaction. "If you don't want me to give the photos to anyone else, you have to fulfill our bet first, the one about Lockhart." "Okay, I admit defeat." Hermione stopped being stubborn and said decisively, "I admit Lockhart is a liar." "Okay, you admitted defeat voluntarily. I didn't force you." Ralph gently stroked his chin with his fingertips, looking the girl up and down. "Since you've admitted defeat, what was the bet? The loser can't just go without any consequences, can he?" "What do you mean, without any consequences? I even helped you find information on the Smith family. Consider that my punishment." Hermione grinned, revealing her 2 front teeth. "Let's call this a day. From now on, neither of us will mention this again." "You wish," Ralph chuckled. "Just because you have 2 front teeth, you think they're bigger and wider than everyone else's? Then what do you want me for?" Hermione raised her chin high, looking playfully defiant. "To brew me a potion." Ralph pointed to a cauldron bubbling away in the distance. "That's it." Hermione raised an eyebrow. She walked over, observed for a moment, and asked, "What kind of potion is this?" "Veritable potion," Ralph said softly. Hermione glanced quickly at the cauldron, lowered her voice, and whispered, "Brewing veritable potion violates school rules, and it's very dangerous. Brewing it for you might break 30 rules. So, are you going to do it or not?" Ralph asked. "Go ahead and do it." "So what if I broke the rules?" "There's nothing I can do about it. I lost." Hermione glanced at the recipe on the table, worriedly saying, "But I've never brewed this kind of potion before. It's the most complex potion I've ever seen." The girl looked up and whispered, "Aren't you afraid I'll ruin it?" Ralph smiled. "Hermione, if it's ruined, just brew it again. I believe in your potion-making talent." How good was Hermione's potion-making talent? She could brew Polyjuice potion in her 2nd year, and succeeded on her first try. If someone like her had poor potion-making talent, then there were practically no outstanding ones. Hermione might not be as good as Professor Snape, but her talent was absolutely first-rate, and Ralph believed in her abilities. Besides, he already had an assistant, but Sherry wasn't good at potions, and he only had so much time, which he also had to spend on alchemy. He really needed a potion master. It would be perfect for Hermione to help, and for free. For Hermione herself, she would also get plenty of practice opportunities. It was a win-win situation. "Hermione, here are special methods for processing many ingredients, and some new methods for brewing potions." Ralph pulled out a notebook and said, "You can take a look." Hermione nodded slightly, took it, and casually flipped through it. "I know some steps might be different from the textbook, but trust me first, then question me." "I won't lie to you," Ralph said earnestly. "All right, I won't disturb your work any longer." Ralph stood up and smiled. "Didn't you always want a cabin? This one is for you. As payment for losing the bet, you'll help me brew potions from now on." "What about the photos?" The girl hurriedly held out her hand. "Give them to me quickly." "There aren't any photos at all," Ralph said softly. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 203 The Killer of Sabini. Sending Hermione to brew potions had several advantages, besides providing her with a free potion-making skill set. The most obvious benefit was that her meticulously planned Christmas study schedule, down to the second, was completely ruined. Hermione devoted most of her energy to studying the potion's notes, neglecting her schoolwork. Frankly, wasting so much time and energy reviewing subjects she already knew, just to improve her final grades by a few points, was pointless. After all, even with those few points less, Hermione was still number 1. It was better to use your time wisely to learn more useful knowledge than to waste it on futile efforts. Hermione had previously been somewhat obsessed with potions, walking with bow legs, and Ralph needed to guide her and straighten her out. Fantastic Beasts were handled by Sherry, potion brewing by Hermione. Ralph also focused all his energy on alchemy. In this leisurely atmosphere, the Christmas holidays slowly came to an end, and the students returned to school on the 9 Express, the once quiet castle bustling with activity again. On the first night of school, Hogwarts hosted a sumptuous dinner: roasted pumpkin with cherry foie gras, caviar with crisp parsley, Scottish pickled cucumbers with white lentils, flavorful pumpkin shreds, and plain boiled lamb leg. Especially the lamb leg, thickly sliced and dipped in sauce, tender, succulent, and incredibly flavorful, without any unpleasant gamey taste. Other schools are known for their teaching quality, but Hogwarts is known for its delicious food. It's that amazing. Sitting at the Hufflepuff table, Ralph ate quite a bit of lamb leg, and finally served himself a bowl of seaweed, natto, and yam salad. He asked softly, "So, did you two go to London last semester at the Duel Club?" Lockhart suffered a comminuted fracture, and Snape gave him a potion, which caused him to be poisoned and sent to St. Mungo's Hospital for Magic and Magic. That potion was brewed by Neville and Hannah. They had even planned to visit Lockhart during Christmas with a box of fruit. "I went, and even listened to you and watched a Muggle movie." Neville didn't laugh out loud. Instead, he lowered his head and said in a low voice, "But Hannah didn't seem to like movies. She fell asleep halfway through." "Fell asleep?" Rove frowned, puzzled. "What movie did you watch?" "Amazing Plants." Rove almost choked on his tea. He patted his chest and coughed a few times before he recovered. "So many good movies this year, like Bram Stoker's Dracula and Scent of a Woman. Weren't they enough for you? You had to watch a plant documentary, didn't you? There are so many interesting plants in it. I never expected Muggles to have such a deep understanding of plants." Neville was full of praise, feeling quite knowledgeable. He even took notes in the theater. This made Rove sigh and rub his forehead. Macmillan, who was copying his homework furiously, looked up and asked curiously, "Why is Professor Lockhart back? I thought he would stay at St. Mungo's Hospital for Magic and wouldn't dare to come back." Yes, Lockhart did come back, and he even attended tonight's dinner, which surprised many people, including Snape. Everyone thought Lockhart would use an excuse not to come and stay in the hospital. Have they forgotten what happened to Quirrell last year? I'd rather cry in Snape's defense against the dark arts class than laugh in Lockhart's acting class, Susan said, making a rather philosophical statement. "Hey, you didn't say that on the Express during the day," Hannah, her best friend, immediately retorted. "You said Professor Snape assigned too much homework, and ugly people are always causing trouble. Are you trying to kill me?" "Talking nonsense," Susan snapped, quickly grabbing a chicken leg and stuffing it into Hannah's mouth. She dared not say such a thing carelessly. If Professor Snape heard her, she might really cry in class. "Then what is it?" Justin suddenly pointed towards the head table. Following his gaze, everyone saw a creature with 2 large, bat-like ears emerge from behind Professor Lockhart. "House elves are the slaves of wizards, performing all household chores, bound by their masters, and unable to disobey their commands," Macmillan added. "My family has them too." Macmillan was most proud of the fact that his family, tracing back 9 generations, consisted entirely of pure-blooded individuals, without a single mixed blood. House elves, these status symbol slaves, were certainly something they had. Completely obedient to the wizard's commands? Does that mean they can do their homework? Justin asked hastily. These words silenced Macmillan instantly. How could he have forgotten this? Justin, as if discovering a new continent, excitedly asked, "Where can I buy a house elf? I want one too." Although he was Muggle-born, he had almost gone to Eton College before entering school, and his family was actually wealthier than most pure-blood families. No, Macmillan shook his finger, emphasizing, "Justin, house elves can't be bought. A house elf has to serve its master for generations. Of course, pure-blood families sometimes give them away, but we don't need to buy them." "I see." Justin looked disappointed. "Actually, you can buy them if you want to," Ralph said softly. "There's a department in the Ministry of Magic called the House Elf Resettlement Office, which takes in stray house elves without owners. House elves who have made mistakes and been banished by wizards go there." Ralph lowered his voice. "To buy a house elf, contact the resettlement office, but the price is very high. These abandoned house elves are looked down upon by wealthy wizarding families, and those who do can't afford them. In the end, most of them end up working in the Hogwarts kitchens, except for those who die. Justin is actually a very nice person. If his family were willing to adopt a house elf, it would be a good home for those homeless creatures. But that's difficult. Justin's parents are both muggles, so they probably wouldn't be eligible before Justin comes of age. "What is Lockhart doing?" Neville suddenly asked. Everyone looked towards the head table, where Lockhart, looking wary, first had the house elf taste the wine and food in his glass. Lockhart was clearly wary of Professor Snape. He was afraid of being poisoned again, so he had the house elf test for poison on his behalf. "Wait," Macmillan frowned, "that house elf looks familiar. Its name seems to be Sasha." "How do you know?" Justin raised an eyebrow. "During the Christmas holidays, my father and I went to Blaise Sabine's house and met this house elf," Macmillan explained. Blaise Sabine was a Slytherin student, in the same year as Rolf and the others, a boy with high cheekbones and dark skin. "What were you doing at his house?" "Attending a funeral," Macmillan shrugged. "Sabine's father died at Christmas. My father and his father were friends." "That's a real shame," Justin said politely. "Nothing to be ashamed of," Rolf chuckled softly. "This is Sabine's sixth father to die, thanks to Just Love to Wonder and QQ Reader 2021030110646758298 inches for their generous donations. Chapter 2 will be released later. Chapter 204 Red Umbrella, White Pole, Eat Together, Sleep on a Board. During the Christmas holidays, quite a few wizards attended Sabine's father's funeral. The house elf named Sachia was even serving dishes at the funeral. Many students recognized her. The next day, the young wizards were all talking about it. Blaise's mother, Mrs. Sabine, was a witch known for her beauty, her reputation for bringing misfortune to her husbands, and her wealth. It was a progressively reinforcing cycle. Her beauty attracted male wizards to marry her, triggering the husband-killing passive, and she gained a fortune, a vicious cycle. She cycled this 6 times, losing 6 husbands. Of course, Blaise Sabine also lost 6 fathers, holding 6 funerals, 5 of whom were stepfathers. Thanks to their shared misfortune attribute, many wizards compared Mrs. Sabine to the Defense Against the Dark Arts, calling them 2 of the most dangerous jobs. In short, blessing your enemy, marrying Mrs. Sabine and working in the Defense Against the Dark Arts is definitely the most vicious curse. And Lockhart being accompanied by the Sabine family's house elf seemed to imply that he was about to become Blaise's 7th father. So, on the first day of school, Defense Against the Dark Arts was once again at full capacity. Even those students who had missed half the semester showed up. Yes, that's right, we're talking about Ralph. Sherry was reading a book when she glanced at the boy beside her and said softly, "Why are you here in class too?" "Just watching the fun," Ralph chuckled. "Everyone's talking about Lady Sabine." Knowing Lockhart's boastful nature, if it's true, he'll definitely bring it up in class. Sherry gazed at Ralph's profile, her brow furrowing slightly. "Ralph, there's something I don't understand. Since she's lost 6 husbands, why would anyone dare marry Lady Sabine? Because she's beautiful." "Lady Sabine is exceptionally beautiful," Ralph quickly added. "I heard it from Neville." Was it Neville? Neville was chatting with Hannah and hadn't heard what Ralph said. Seeing the boy nudging him with his elbow, he nodded in agreement. Yes, yes, yes. Hannah, with her sharp ears, heard everything clearly and looked at Neville with a strange expression. He seems honest and unassuming, but behind your back, he's always gossiping about how pretty other people's mothers are, right? Wow, that's really something. So, male wizards will marry female wizards simply because they're pretty? Shirley asked again. Some people do, but not everyone. Personality, hobbies, lifestyle, there are too many influencing factors, Ralph asked curiously. Why are you suddenly asking this? Nothing, it's just that some of my roommates were discussing this last night. Shirley tilted her head and smiled gently. I'm a little curious. The topics discussed in the girls' dormitory were actually quite stimulating. Even she, who knew nothing about such things, had been given a little bit of background knowledge. Occasionally, she would blush when she heard their more explicit conversations. So, what kind of witch do you like? Shirley stared into the boy's eyes and quickly added, I'm asking for my roommates. They're all very curious. I refuse to answer such a boring question. Ralph chuckled, gently tugging at the girl's ponytail. Don't pick up bad habits from your roommates. Sherry glared at him, but it wasn't very effective. Just then, Lockhart walked into the classroom, wearing a navy blue robe and a green top hat with gold trim on his blonde hair. Behind him followed a house elf, dressed in tattered clothes and carrying a huge stack of books. There were so many books that she stumbled as she entered, almost dropping them. "Children," Lockhart said loudly, waving for quiet. "After a long Christmas holiday, I'm back at Hogwarts. On this day of reunion, I have a small announcement to make, something I've kept under wraps for a while, not to the reporters or the book fans." Everyone thought Lockhart was about to announce his marriage to Mrs. Sabine, but instead, he turned around, tapped the stack of books in the house elf's hand, and said, "That's my new book, Fighting the Curse, which is going on sale. It's a novella I finished during the Christmas holidays. It tells the story of how I used magic to help a witch who had lost 6 husbands break free from the curse." "Professor, is it related to Mrs. Sabine?" Justin quickly raised his hand. Lockhart smiled mysteriously. "You'll have to read the book yourselves. I can only say that it does involve the beautiful Sabine." "Professor, what's your relationship with her?" Susan boldly asked. "MRS. Sabine is a big fan of mine. Her poor husband just died, and I helped her with some trouble." Lockhart pointed to the house elf Shasha behind him and smiled. "She even gave me a house elf to protect me at Hogwarts. We're planning a trip to France after this term, but I'm worried I won't be able to find the time." Lockhart was talking non-stop, recounting his story with Sabine. His words subtly implied that his new book was related to this beautiful woman's role in her husband's death, the core message being, buy the book. Why did Lockhart return? Of course, to sell books. Why did he dare return? With the protection of the house elves, he didn't believe anything would happen to him. After class, on their way to herbalism class, the students were still discussing this heatedly. Clearly, Lockhart's marketing was effective. Many students were itching to buy a copy and read the contents. However, many more students believed this might be Lockhart's last book. With a double buff of dark magic defense and Sabine's curse, it would be impolite if he didn't die soon. The group crossed the damp vegetable patch and arrived at the third greenhouse. Professor Sprout stood beside a giant mushroom, over 3 meters tall, like a tree. She clapped her hands to quiet the students and quickly said, "Today we'll learn about a jumping mushroom, but before that, I'm going to teach you a song. Sing along with me. Red umbrella, white stem, eat it and sleep on the coffin, then we'll be buried together on the mountain." All the students sang along. Professor Sprout asked, "Who can tell me what this song means?" Hermione immediately raised her hand and said, "A brightly colored mushroom with a red umbrella and white stem is a poisonous mushroom. The brighter the color, the more poisonous it is." "That's right, 5 points for Gryffindor," Professor Sprout said. However, although this song is widely known, it's actually wrong, or rather, not absolute. For example, the hallucinogenic mushroom has a red umbrella and white stem, but eating it will only cause hallucinations, not death. There's also a poisonous red mushroom that will only cause diarrhea. Everyone remember this, Professor Sprout shouted. The most poisonous mushrooms you'll encounter, the ones that will kill you if eaten, are mainly gray umbrellas with white stems. Or white umbrellas with white stems. For example, the gray patterned amanita mushroom, even a small piece will kill you. All the students immediately began taking notes. Chapter 205 The Real Fisherman. Countless people in this world have died from accidentally eating poisonous mushrooms, but if you ask who is the most famous, it would undoubtedly be Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, Shakyamuni. He ate sandalwood mushrooms, offered as his last meal by the blacksmith Kunda in Kushinagar, and after being poisoned, he entered nirvana between the twin sala trees by the Vedas river. At the time of Shakyamuni's passing, the twin trees suddenly bloomed with white flowers, a phenomenon known as nirvana in the twin sala trees. Sandalwood mushrooms are a type of magical fungus unique to India, belonging to the category of highly poisonous mushrooms. There are over 400 known species of mushrooms with significant toxicity worldwide, and if magical fungi are included, the number increases considerably. Every year, young wizards are poisoned by accidentally eating mushrooms, so as a herbalist, Sprout must teach her students how to distinguish between poisonous and non-poisonous mushrooms. Dean Thomas of Gryffindor raised his hand, asking a question that few could conceive without 12 years of brain thrombosis. "Professor, since these poisonous mushrooms are so dangerous, why not eradicate them? Otherwise, a constant stream of wizards will keep accidentally eating them." He had once accidentally eaten a hallucinogenic mushroom, mistook a swallowtail hound for a witch, and kissed it, only to be bitten 3 times and forced to drink rabies suppressants for a week. Because these mushrooms don't grow for wizards to eat, Professor Sprout chuckled angrily. Those poisonous fungi are important raw materials for many potions, and even the antibiotics that muggles abuse are extracted from fungi. And, Professor Sprout said seriously, the vast majority of mushroom species are symbiotic fungi. They live in symbiosis with magical plants, which is an important part of helping the plants survive better. By the way, this is important for the final exam. Hearing the professor's reminder, the young wizard picked up his quill and started scribbling notes. Professor Sprout summarized a whole host of benefits, concluding with the emphasis, while poisonous mushrooms are toxic, they also have many important uses. From now on, when you see mushrooms, please don't deliberately damage them, or even stomp on them. This is also a sign of respect for magical plants. Professor Sprout led the students through patches of mushrooms, constantly introducing the various colored mushrooms. When there came to a patch of red mushrooms, she emphasized, these are laughing mushrooms. Eating them will cause hallucinations, leading to strange behavior. The main symptoms are mental abnormalities, dancing, singing, maniacal laughter, and visual hallucinations. The most amazing thing is, Professor Sprout smiled, these laughing mushrooms only affect wizards, other magical creatures will be unaffected. Everyone stared at the laughing mushrooms. Were they really that magical? Alright, next I'll take you to collect jumping mushrooms. Now, who can tell me what the characteristics of jumping mushrooms are? Hermione was about to raise her hand to answer this question when she suddenly noticed Ralph quietly bending down, using her body as cover to secretly pluck magical mushrooms. Ralph planned to collect some mushrooms to plant in his box. The girl rolled her eyes, grinned mischievously, and shifted to the side, completely exposing herself. Professor Sprout, of course, saw this and called out, Mr. Scamander, will you answer this question? Ralph quickly turned around and found Professor Sprout staring at him. Caught red-handed, the boy said somewhat awkwardly, the jumping mushroom has a keen sense of its surroundings. Once it senses someone trying to pick it, it will quickly leap away. That's right, 5 points for Hufflepuff. Professor Sprout raised an eyebrow. Also, pay attention. After class, you'll stay and help fertilize the magic mushrooms. Ralph glanced at Hermione. The little girl was suppressing a laugh, her lips twitching slightly before she quickly suppressed it again. The mushrooms will move, so you'll need mushroom catching nets, Professor Sprout said, pointing to the nets not far away. 1 net for each of you. The wizard who collects the most moving mushrooms will get 15 points. The students all ran to get mushroom catching nets, afraid of being a step behind and getting the worst one. Hermione's lips curled up. She turned to the side, gazing at Ralph's profile, and said smugly, got caught stealing magic mushrooms, huh? Want to make a bet, Hermione? Ralph challenged. A new bet. Hermione wanted to refuse. After all, she had just lost, and now she was brewing potions for Ralph for free. She had learned her lesson. But finally, unable to hold it in any longer, she couldn't help but ask, what are we betting on? Whoever collects the most dancing mushrooms, wins, Ralph said softly. If you lose, you'll stay and fertilize the magic mushrooms for me. If I lose, you won't have to brew potions for free anymore, and I'll pay you a salary, the same as Sherry's. Are you in for the bet? Hermione thought for a moment and said, I'll bet, but you're not allowed to use your weird magic. Okay, I absolutely won't use any magic. Ralph smiled. He never held back his revenge. Everyone had their mushroom nets, except for Harry and Ron, who remained huddled together whispering. Professor Sprout frowned, walked over, and said sternly, what are you two talking about? Harry was startled and quickly turned around, lying, sorry, Professor, Ron and we were discussing that mushroom. You just said it will cause diarrhea, right? Ron insisted it will cause unconsciousness, so we started arguing. Ron nodded in agreement, as if Harry's words were true. You're mistaken, Mr. Weasley, this is a chicken gizzard mushroom, and it does cause persistent diarrhea, Professor Sprout said softly. Will eating too many kill you? Ron asked. No, Professor Sprout looked at them suspiciously. Alright, hurry up and catch some mushrooms, everyone else has already started. Yes, Professor, we'll get started right away. Ron saw Sprout turn away and whispered, are you sure you want to use it, Harry? It won't kill anyone anyway. Harry gritted his teeth. To prevent the jumping mushrooms from escaping, they were grown in a glass room. As the students lined up to enter, the mushrooms felt the ground tremble. They burst from the soil and leaped towards the ceiling. The swarms of mushrooms looked like spores, or perhaps fluttering red umbrellas. Fortunately, the surrounding area was glass, preventing their escape. They could only hop around. Ralph held a mushroom-catching net, the mesh neither too wide nor too narrow. Smaller mushrooms could weave freely through the mesh, while larger ones were caught. This was like fishing, providing indirect protection for the fry. Ralph casually caught a mushroom in the net. It landed on the large net, jumping and bouncing around. Ralph reached out and grabbed the thrashing mushroom. It bounced around in his palm, a beautiful, entirely pink mushroom. To Hermione's astonishment, Ralph tossed the net aside, opened his black leather case, and took out a special fishing rod. A true angler can fish anywhere, for non-fish creatures. Chapter 206 The Discovered Bird Snake. All the students were using mushroom nets to catch the jumping mushrooms. But the results were disappointing. The mushrooms were very sensitive, jumping up at the slightest touch, and they were quite fast. If that were all, it wouldn't be so bad, but the nets were of poor quality. Justin lifted his net, grabbed a large, canine-sized mushroom, and it jumped, tearing the net apart. The jumping mushroom slammed into Justin's face, sending him sprawling to the ground, dazed. Hermione, wanting to grab a big one, patiently waited. When the mushrooms thought they were safe and wouldn't fall again, she suddenly lifted her net and slammed it over them. But she used too much force, and the wooden pole of the net snapped. Ralph, fiddling with his fishing rod, accidentally witnessed this and almost burst out laughing. Neville's net was of decent quality, but he caught too many and refused to let go, resulting in him being dragged towards the ceiling by a swarm of jumping mushrooms. Neville was pulled upwards once, his body falling back to the ground, bouncing up from the ground, and then falling back down again, repeating this over and over, like a drop tower. Hannah accidentally swallowed a mushroom, and she kept hiccuping. Rove took out a large bottle of solution, poured it on the mushroom he had caught, and then hung the mushroom on the fishing rod. The boy made a casting motion, the fishing line binding the mushroom, which began to struggle violently and jump into the distance. Every time the mushroom collided with another mushroom, it would stick to it, like a waterlogged chicken leg falling into breadcrumbs. Rove pulled the fishing rod back sharply, and the rod was pulled into an astonishing arc. Hermione changed her mushroom-catching net and ran over, looking disheveled. "How did you do that?" she couldn't help but ask. "The spider silk from the octopod is incredibly sticky. After extracting the juice, I found it's even stronger than glue," Ralph explained. "Basically, once you touch it, you're stuck and can't get off. That's not fair." "You changed your tools," Hermione cried, on the verge of tears. "The school's mushroom-catching nets are so bad, they affected my performance." "You didn't say we couldn't change tools," Ralph chuckled. "Besides, our school's teaching tools are terrible. You only realized that on your first day, right? Have you forgotten those old-fashioned brooms from flying broom class?" Hermione was speechless for a moment. She turned to look at her pitifully low catch count, feeling a little sad. Ralph comforted her. "It's all right, I'll stay and help you fertilize later." Hermione shook her little fist vigorously in front of the boy, complaining. "This is clearly your job," Ralph reminded her. "It's because you lost. I'll never bet with you again." Hermione sighed, shaking her head, looking dejected. "It's no fun." Ralph couldn't help but chuckle and quickly comforted her. "It's all right, I'll let you win next time." "You said it." The girl's face was no longer troubled. She tilted her head back, smiling smugly. "You're a dog if you lie to me." At the end of her biology class, Ralph, being a top-notch angler, could catch anything except fish. He undoubtedly caught the most jumping mushrooms, earning Hufflepuff 15 points. But the problem was, after the slime solidified, all the mushrooms stuck together tightly, impossible to separate. Professor Sprout deducted another point from Ralph for damaging the plants. She initially intended to deduct 5 points, but considering this was a crucial moment in the competition for academy points, she couldn't afford to lose points for her own students. The extract from the silk of the eight-eyed giant spider, like super strong glue, seemed to have a stronger adhesive effect than commercially available magical tape, and it became an instant hit. Many students were interested and wanted to buy it to glue things together. The twins also immediately bought some glue from Ralph, intending to use it for pranks. Of course, this was just a minor matter. The students were mostly discussing Professor Lockhart's new book. Because of Mrs. Sabine's hype, many young wizards were preparing to buy it. Lockhart was incredibly excited. His last book had maintained a 6-month bestseller record, and he was confident this one would break it. In Lockhart's classes, magical creatures were introduced again, but instead of him dealing with them, his assistant, the house elf Sasha, handled them. The house elf, though seemingly frail, possessed powerful magic, making dealing with magical creatures a breeze. Lockhart became somewhat smug and started to get carried away. The most upset was Blaise Sabine. He'd already had 6 fathers and wouldn't mind a 7th, but he really didn't want it to be Lockhart, that fraudster. Even Malfoy, when he saw Blaise, would deliberately wink and sneer in a high-pitched voice, "Your father, a Sergeant Merlin, 3rd class, honorary member of the League Against the Dark Arts. Lockhart has arrived." Goyle and Crabbe, one playing Lockhart and the other Mrs. Sabine, would deliberately hug each other. Malfoy could annoy Harry and Ron. After all, their manners needed some improvement, and they wouldn't really do anything to him, but Blaise Sabine was different. He bought some glue from Ralph and secretly put it in the bowls of the 3 of them, sealing their mouths shut. Malfoy and the others had no choice but to stop Ralph, staging a silent act, begging him to unlock them. Ralph, being a kind-hearted veterinarian, would never refuse any patient. He even offered a discount, finally tearfully charging only 300 galleons per person. Rove had barely earned a little extra money when someone came knocking on his door demanding payment. Standing in the hallway, Rove was cornered by Ginny and Luna. He crossed his arms and said, "Didn't I settle the bill with you last semester?" Seeing that Ginny was short of money, he had her and Luna conduct a survey to record the appearance of the mysterious creature other students had seen. After Rove investigated Lockhart's office and confirmed it was a bird snake, he settled the bill with Ginny and ended the job. "You said you'd pay more if you could take a picture," Ginny pouted. "But I already know what it is, I don't need a picture," Rove said, pursing his lips. "Besides, you took pictures last time too. Muggles took clearer pictures of UFOs and the Loch Ness Monster than you. And in the end, it turned out to be just a cat." Ginny blushed slightly and said weakly, "Rove, this picture is really clear, there's no mistake, trust me." "Where's the picture?" Rove asked casually. "Colin, come here quickly, bring me the photo you took," Ginny called to the boy not far away. Colin was a very thin, gray-haired little boy, clutching an ordinary Muggle camera. Rove turned to look at him, and the boy's face immediately turned red. "Hello, Rove. I took this by accident." He excitedly handed over a photo, which Rove took and frowned. This time the photo was indeed very clear. It showed a snake-like creature with wings and blue feathers all over its body. "Where did you take this?" Rove clutched the photo tightly. "The owl shed." Colin's voice trembled. "I was just about to mail a letter to my dad." Rove turned and walked away. Ginny followed behind, stamping her foot and shouting, "You haven't paid yet, Rove, on credit." Thanks to Trooper 1770 and Jess Love to Wonder for their generous donations. Chapter 207, The Bird Snake's Multiplication Technique. Besides the main castle, Hogwarts has 4 towers: Gryffindor Tower, Ravenclaw Tower, Astronomy Tower, West Tower, and North Tower. The Owl Shack is located on the top floor of the West Tower. As Ralph walked up the stairs to the West Tower, he noticed someone sneaking behind him out of the corner of his eye. He stopped, and Ginny, Luna, and Colin immediately ducked at the bottom of the stairs. Colin was a little slow to react and was slapped in the forehead by Ginny. Ralph bent down to tie his shoelaces and continued walking. The 3 cautiously followed, but around a corner, Ralph disappeared. "Hey, where did Ralph go?" Ginny looked around. "Look for him." Colin stood at the edge of the corridor, looking down from the 4th floor, seemingly afraid Ralph might jump. Ginny looked at the trash can in the corner, checking if he was hiding inside. Luna closed her eyes and started spinning in place. Her father had told her that spinning like this would clear her mind and allow her to enter the realm of the wise. Then she could find the person she was looking for. The little girl spun around and around, until she was dizzy and unsteady, stumbling and staggering. Luckily, she bumped her back hard, seemingly hitting a wall, which prevented her from falling. The girl opened her eyes, feeling dizzy, and saw Rove standing behind her, gently supporting her shoulder. "See? Dad hadn't lied after all." Rove looked at Luna with a puzzled expression, then gave her a flick on the forehead to bring her back to her senses. Rove then delivered a chop to Ginny's head, his face stern. "Why did you 2 follow us?" he asked. Luna stared with her glazed eyes and said, "To help." "That's right," Ginny cried, clutching her head. "That monster looks dangerous." Rove glanced at Luna. The little girl wore small, orange-red, radish-shaped fruits on her ears and large, colorful glasses, more cute than capable. Ginny was also a complete weakling. The two of them combined probably weren't even as useful as the Botricle. Add to that Colin, who only knew how to take pictures. You guys are just getting in the way. Ralph rolled his eyes. Don't look down on me, Ginny retorted, somewhat unconvinced. I'm the one who chased away the goblins in our vegetable garden. Ralph rubbed his chin, thought for a moment, and said, you guys actually seem capable of helping a little. What kind of help? Go catch me a few cockroaches. Ralph chuckled. I'll wait for you in the owl shed. Ralph dismissed them and walked alone down the corridor to the west tower. He ascended a narrow spiral staircase to the owl shed at the top of the tower. All of Hogwarts' owls were there, including those of the young wizards and the school's public owls, a total of over 1,000. This owl shed, too, embraced a minimalist, nature-inspired design, a 180 degrees open layout, cool in winter and warm in summer. The floor was covered in straw, owl droppings, dead rats, and rat bones. Various wild grasses and vines grew on the walls where the nests were nested, all stubbornly sprouting from seeds found in the owl droppings. A cold wind howled past, forcing Rove to pull his robe tighter. A fire lizard perched on the boy's shoulder, its mouth agape like a radar, revealing sharp teeth, then flicking out a ball of flame with its tongue. After circling once, the fire lizard suddenly hissed as it looked towards a corner. Rove narrowed his eyes and walked in that direction. Suddenly sensing danger, he keenly observed a bird's nest. He saw a magical creature, no bigger than a palm, a bird's head, wings on its back, a snake-like body, 2 claws on its belly, and a bluish-purple coat whose feathers shimmered in the setting sun. Suddenly, a ding sounded in Rove's mind, a wild bird snake detected. Side quest triggered, capture the bird snake. Reward, magic, Dynamax, freely enlarge and shrink your body. Note, can multiply and shrink parts of your body. Side quest 2, complete 100% taming of the bird snake. Reward, bird snake wings, a pair of magical wings can be conjured from its back using magic. Quest incomplete, the bird snake, similar to a shape-shifting lizard, can freely expand and contract, changing size and thickness. Therefore, Rove wasn't too surprised to see the system's quest, but the ability to partially expand was indeed intriguing. Upon seeing Rove, the bird snake suddenly leaped into the air, its body trembling as it abruptly grew to 4 or 5 meters long. The bird snake hovered in midair, its wings rapidly flapping, emitting a buzzing sound like bees. All the owls were startled, flying into the sky and circling high above. The owl snake arched its body high, then suddenly swooped down, charging towards Rove. The boy hadn't yet seen Luna and the others, but it didn't matter. He reached out and grabbed the wall. The weeds and vines in the owl house spread rapidly, and countless cracks appeared in the wall, as if it were about to be uprooted by the boy's grasp. In an instant, countless vines, like ropes, shot towards the owl snake. It was struck on the wing by the vines, and continued its forward momentum, but its direction veered off course, its body just missing Rove before crashing heavily to the ground. The owl snake let out a piercing shriek, its body coiling like a python, quickly growing larger again, like a massive fire dragon, occupying most of the owl house. It trembled slightly, its back slamming against the wall, sending stones crashing down. The owl snake grew larger and larger, like an elephant squeezing into a refrigerator. With a mere twist of its body, it could completely crush the owl's nest. Its tail lashed out with lightning speed, slicing through the wall as easily as a knife through tofu. Its wings, whistling through the air, swept upwards violently, tearing off the roof. The owl's shed collapsed with a deafening roar, debris raining down, its home was destroyed, and thousands of owls croaked angrily. Many students noticed the scene, standing in horror on the grass, gazing at the tower's roof from afar. Rove had already retreated to the stairs, as Ginny, Luna, and Colin arrived, each holding a cockroach. The owl-like snake was incredibly powerful, but it had a fatal weakness, its love of insects. It was a true glutton. Rove took a cockroach from Luna, walked forward, and held it high. The owl-like snake suddenly lowered its body, its eyes narrowing into cross-eyed stares intently at the cockroach. The boy produced another small bottle. He tossed the cockroach into it, and the avian snake rose up, its body rapidly shrinking as it burrowed headfirst into the bottle. Once inside, the avian snake, shrunk into the size of an earthworm, greedily devoured the cockroach. Rolf pressed the lid against the bottle's opening, then gently shook it, unable to suppress a laugh. What a gluttonous little thing. Chapter 208 It doesn't matter, I will take action. After capturing the bird snake, Ralph looked at the mangled owl pen and prepared to flee the scene. But before he, along with Luna, Ginny, and Colin, could escape, they were caught red-handed by Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall. The owl pen had collapsed. Such a commotion would surely alert anyone who wasn't deaf or blind. Dumbledore took the bottle from Ralph, his gaze sweeping down his long, hooked nose, focusing intently on the bird snake. Professor McGonagall's lips were pale. She clutched her clothes, gasping for breath, whether from anger or relief that her students were unharmed, it was unclear. She hesitated for a long time before finally pursing her lips and saying in a trembling voice, "Mr. Scamander, I know you're very capable and knowledgeable, and you've even learned a lot from Newt about dealing with magical creatures, but if you encounter something like this again, please inform the professor so we can handle it. Don't always act alone, it's dangerous." "I understand, I'm sorry, Professor McGonagall." Ralph looked remorseful and promised, "This is the last time I'll ever break the school rules." Professor McGonagall's expression softened considerably. She then looked at Ginny and the others. "And you three, you're only first years and you're already causing trouble with Scamander, aren't you, Professor? We caught a mysterious animal that attacked the students," Ginny protested. It wasn't trouble, she felt wronged. Not only did she not get extra points, but she was also being criticized. Ralph barely suppressed a laugh. They were still too young. If it were Sherry or Hermione, or even Neville, they wouldn't have argued. You can't argue in a situation like this, or Professor McGonagall will show you what the Iron Fist of Justice is. Sure enough, Professor McGonagall's face immediately darkened, and she said sternly, "This is no excuse for your reckless actions. I am furious. 3 first-year students catching a bird snake. I have never heard of such a thing before. It's even more outrageous than last Halloween when a few students went to fight a troll." At this point, Professor McGonagall suddenly remembered that Ralph had also been involved in the troll incident. "Why is it always you, boy? You, Miss Weasley, should be learning from your brothers Bill and Percy, not George, Fred, and Ron," Professor McGonagall said coldly. "And you, Mr. Clifton, no matter what, you took a picture of the bird snake, and you should have sent it to me first, not to Mr. Scamander. I am your head of house, not him. You and Miss Weasley will both be put in detention. As for you, Miss Lovegood, I will tell Professor Flitwick about this and let him deal with you." Ralph stood aside, eyes downcast, absolutely silent, his face even showing regret, to avoid getting into trouble. As expected, Professor McGonagall ultimately overlooked the extremely sincere Ralph, only punishing Ginny and the other two, which almost made him burst out laughing. After everyone left, only Ralph and Dumbledore remained in Owl House. Dumbledore raised his wand and gently waved it, saying, "Restore to its original state." The Owl House, destroyed by Ralph and the bird snake, instantly returned to its original state. Except for the absence of the bird snake, the entire shed was exactly as Ralph had arrived, without a single flaw. Witnessing such magic firsthand, Ralph was also amazed. Not only was Dumbledore's skill too effortless, but also, the vines that he had magically nurtured had all shrunk back. He was certain that a normal wizard's restored to its original state could not achieve this effect. It could only be due to the Elder Wand. After all, it possessed the magical power to restore even broken wands. Ralph quickly told the headmaster about discovering Lockhart's smuggling of bird snakes. Of course, he didn't hide his intrusion into Lockhart's office. "I understand," Dumbledore nodded calmly. "I will tell Minister Fudge about this. At the end of this term, no matter what, Professor Lockhart will have to pay for what he did." Ralph nodded slightly. "Then I'll head back now, Professor." "Ralph, take this back with you too. You worked so hard to catch it." Dumbledore turned and tossed a bottle containing the bird snake to the boy. The old man blinked. "Oh, and whatever you do, don't let Professor McGonagall see it. She told me to confiscate it." Ralph grinned. "I know." The sudden collapse of the Owl House was witnessed by many students. This news spread throughout Hogwarts in the shortest possible time. Everyone was discussing this bizarre event, and many students immediately went to the Owl House to see what had happened. But strangely, when everyone arrived, they found that the Owl House was completely undamaged. One student might have been mistaken, but it was impossible for all the students to be mistaken. This was practically a ghost story about the Owl House. However, the buzz surrounding this incident lasted only 2 days before being overshadowed by another bombshell. The mysterious animal involved in the prize room attack had been caught, and it turned out to be a bird snake. Professor Dumbledore confirmed this at the dinner party, praising Ralph and his friends, but also warning the young wizards to inform the professor first in case of danger and not to act on their own. The students were very concerned about the bird snake, surrounding Ralph and his friends every day, trying to gather information. Ralph was fine, he was used to being surrounded by students wherever he went, so he wasn't bothered at all. But Luna, Ginny, and Colin were experiencing something like this for the first time. The three of them tacitly chose to keep quiet. Especially Ginny, unlike Ron, who would exaggerate and fabricate stories to attract everyone's attention. However, although they were hailed as heroes by the students, the three of them still had to clean up the bird droppings on the Owl House floor as punishment. Fortunately, Ralph paid double the reward, which offered Ginny some consolation. Professor Lockhart once again displayed his superb acting skills. The bird snake was clearly his, yet he claimed it was lost by the attacker who opened the locked room. First, he wanted to shift the blame. Professor Lockhart continued teaching, calmly telling his students, "I don't think there will be any more trouble. The locked room will never be opened again this time. The bird snake has been caught, and the culprit is now without his weapon. He certainly won't dare to show his face again." When Hannah raised her hand to ask Lockhart what would happen if the attack occurred again, he nonchalantly replied, "It doesn't matter, I'll handle it." With the protection of his house elf, Sasha, Lockhart was utterly confident. He even thought the students were terrified and needed a morale boost. Thanks to Just Love to Wonder and QQ Reading user book friend 2021030110646758298 inches for their generous donations. Chapter 209 Get Rid of Him. Early in the morning, Ralph and Neville left the Hufflepuff common room and entered the Great Hall. They hadn't gone far before they froze. The walls were covered in red roses, and heart-shaped confetti kept falling from the light blue ceiling. The tables were also covered in pink heart-shaped stickers. Ralph almost thought he'd wandered onto the wrong set, stumbling upon someone's wedding. Was some professor getting married? Wait, are there any unmarried teachers at Hogwarts? Well, it seems everyone's single. After they sat down at the Hufflepuff table, Ralph asked curiously, "What day is it today?" Neville thought for a moment, then said uncertainly, "It seems to be the 2400th anniversary of the death of the famous ancient Greek herbalist Theophrastus. Your memory is usually so bad, but when it comes to herbs, it suddenly becomes perfect, huh?" Ralph pointed to several large radios in the distance, the wizarding radio playing the Strange Sisters' single love song. Playing single songs on an anniversary, huh? To be fair, Ralph had attended many funerals in his past life, and many filial sons and daughters would indeed hire bands to sing love songs, and some even hire dancers to perform energetic dances in front of the coffin. Thinking about it that way, it seemed acceptable. "Don't you guys ever check the calendar before you go out?" Hannah laughed. "Today is February 14th, Valentine's Day." In fact, Ralph and Neville weren't the only ones who didn't check the calendar. Professor McGonagall was too. Entering the Great Hall, she was startled by the gaudy decorations and walked to the VIP section, asking in astonishment, "What happened, Professor McGonagall?" "You should ask Professor Lockhart," Professor Flitwick said sternly. Snape also wore a mocking smile, looking like he was enjoying the drama. "Professor Lockhart, please explain," Professor McGonagall asked. Professor Lockhart was adjusting his pink robes, which he had specially chosen to match the decorations. He chuckled, "Valentine's Day, Minerva. Students should celebrate properly." "Valentine's Day?" Professor McGonagall was furious. "Is this a holiday for students?" she snapped. "Don't be so old-fashioned, Professor McGonagall. This is the 90s, not your youth anymore," Professor Lockhart laughed. "Students have different ideas, they're all very open-minded. I dare say a third of them have had a boyfriend. Don't be so conservative, living like ascetics all day. Anyone would think that being a professor at Hogwarts requires a single status agreement." Lockhart whistled, teasing, "Especially Professor Snape, you're over 30, not young anymore. Haven't you ever had a proper relationship?" Snape's smile vanished instantly. He stared at Lockhart as if he wanted to force-feed him a cup of poison. Professor Flitwick didn't dare breathe. Lockhart's aggressiveness, wasn't he afraid of death? Lockhart wasn't afraid at all. He had house elves protecting him, and if things went wrong, he could always escape. "Professor Lockhart, what time is it now?" Professor McGonagall roared angrily. "The culprit who attacked Filch and Mrs. Pince hasn't been caught yet. That's precisely why," Lockhart insisted. Now the school needs a morale boost and to erase those memories of the attacks. Trust me, I'm very good at that. Lockhart stood up, waved his arms, and shouted, "Happy Valentine's Day, everyone." So far, 25 people have given me Valentine's Day cards. And I thank them all. Yes, I took the liberty of arranging this little surprise for everyone, and that's not all. Lockhart clapped his hands, and 12 male dwarves strode into the great hall. They wore sexy short skirts, had golden wings on their backs, and carried harps. Their appearance was so ugly that many people almost vomited. "They are cupids for today," Lockhart announced grandly. "Anyone with a love letter can give it to them to deliver. Let's see who's the lucky one today, receiving the most love letters. I'll reward them with a new book signed by me." All the professors looked grim, exchanging glances and plotting how to get rid of Lockhart. But no matter how much Lockhart liked to boast, one thing was true: he was indeed very good at enlivening the castle atmosphere. At least the classroom atmosphere was lively. In every class, dwarves would suddenly burst into the classroom, delivering Valentine's Day cards, causing great disruption to the lessons. In Transfiguration class, Professor McGonagall was teaching the students how to turn rabbits into boots when a group of dwarves rushed in, scaring half the rabbits to death. Many young wizards were also frightened. They had never raised rabbits and didn't know that rabbits are naturally timid and sensitive, easily frightened to death by the slightest noise. As a veterinarian, Ralph explained, this is a typical case of acute stress syndrome. When rabbits are stressed, their levels of adrenocorticotropic hormone spike, causing a spike in blood pressure, ruptured blood vessels, and ultimately death. This is perfectly normal. Ralph added that the rabbits weren't sick and could easily be eaten for lunch. Professor McGonagall glared at the boy and decided she would never use rabbits as teaching tools again. In Charms class, Professor Flitwick, to avoid being disturbed, used a locking charm to seal the door, and he even taught the students the charm. But the dwarves kept knocking, forcing him to reopen the door. In Potions class, the dwarves came 7 or 8 times, bringing Ralph Valentine's Day cards. Professor Snape initially mocked Ralph, even reading aloud love letters written to him. But as the dwarves' visits increased, he grew impatient, and Neville and Hannah, like the rabbits, were particularly prone to stress. They blew up 4 cauldrons in one class. Finally, another dwarf rushed in and ran towards Ralph. Snape's face was so dark it seemed to drip oil, and he said in an icy voice, "Scamander, how many love letters is this? When will this end? I think Hufflepuff will lose another 10 points because of that social butterfly." I'm sorry, Professor." Sherry, sitting next to Ralph, raised her hand weakly and said, "This time it's a greeting card for me." "Get out of here," Snape roared. "You two get out of here and stand in the doorway. With cauldrons on your heads." Now, Ralph, Sherry, Chapter 2 will be released later. I can't say when, but it will definitely be before tomorrow morning. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 210 My Foolish Brother. Standing at the potions class door, Ralph and Sherry each had a glass bottle filled with potions balanced on their heads. Snape couldn't find a suitable cauldron, but he felt this thing worked better, and said with satisfaction, "If the bottle breaks or the potion spills, Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw will lose points." Snape, dragging his robes like a giant bat, walked towards the classroom, leaving behind the last words, "Mr. Scamander and Miss Swinton, you two can enjoy Valentine's Day here." Ralph, thick-skinned, didn't react at all, but the girl, thin-skinned, blushed instantly. After Snape entered the classroom, a botricle quietly emerged from Ralph's collar. It perched on the boy's shoulder, ran lightly, leaped high, its body springing upwards, and then, like an ape, climbed onto the lamp holder on the wall. The botricle sat sideways on the shelf, its fine-like arms suddenly stretching out to hook the 2 bottles, suspending them slightly above the boy and girl's heads. Ralph twisted his neck and whispered, "Thank you, Groot." Sherry also looked up and thanked him. The girl rubbed her burning cheeks and said softly, "I'm sorry, Ralph, I dragged you into this. It has nothing to do with you. You were just unlucky to run into the line of fire." Ralph comforted her. "Besides, it's just standing in the corner as punishment. It's not a big deal." Sherry gave a soft hum, then suddenly pulled out the love letter and greeting card, folding it into a paper airplane. Aren't you going to see who sent it? Ralph asked. Who cares who sent it? The girl with the ponytail gently tossed the paper airplane away. It arced through the air before landing in the trash can. Anyway, I wouldn't like it. There's absolutely no need to look at it. Is that so? Isn't that so? When Shirley was puzzled, her eyes were particularly bright. She tilted her head slightly and stared at the boy, asking, "So, you've read all the love letters and greeting cards you received today, and you're planning to reply?" "No way, I don't have that much free time or boredom." Ralph took out a stack of greeting cards from his pocket. He thought for a moment and said, "Since we're just killing time, let's fold them all into paper airplanes. Let's have a competition to see whose paper airplane flies the farthest." "Okay." The girl with the ponytail blinked her beautiful eyes, and her originally raised willow leaf eyebrows quietly relaxed. A warm smile appeared on her lips. Ralph gazed at Sherry's increasingly exquisite and beautiful profile and asked, "What are you laughing at?" "Did I laugh?" "Yes, fine. I won't tell you." Sherry's smile was exceptionally bright. She reached out and snatched a love letter from Ralph's hand, quickly folded it into a paper airplane, and threw it. The girl grinned, flying. The paper airplane circled halfway in midair before veering off course and flying towards the potions classroom. Just then, a dwarf came running down the corridor. Ralph quickly drew his wand, ready to shut him up. Fortunately, the dwarf wasn't there to deliver a love letter to Ralph and Sherry, and the two breathed a sigh of relief. The dwarf strode into the potions classroom, only to hear Professor Snape roar, "Get out!" Looking at the wand in Snape's hand, the dwarf had no choice but to leave the classroom and stand in the corridor, shouting, "I have a message about music to deliver personally." The dwarf then began to strum his harp. "Dear Professor Snape, whenever I brew potions, I think of you. Your greasy black hair, like wolf's bane. Your handsome, withered face, like mugwort infused with liquid. I miss you so much. When I miss you most, I lie in bed, desperately chanting spells, slapping my face in agony, harder and harder, until tears stream down my face. I really miss you so much I'm going crazy, like I'm under a curse." Professor Snape burst out of the classroom, raising his wand high, a thick red light flashing past. The little dwarf flew backward like a kite with a broken string, twitching twice on the ground before passing out. Snape turned around menacingly. The botricle released its grip, and the glass bottle fell back onto the boy and girl's heads, immediately hiding itself. Ralph and Sherry also quickly straightened their faces and stood up straight, like two little Dorgoths. In potions class, a shocking incident occurred. Professor Snape attacked a dwarf, and news quickly spread throughout Hogwarts. While Professor Snape was usually sarcastic and eccentric, he had never lost his temper like this in class before. The scene was truly frightening. Many students speculated that the love letters and cards might be Lockhart's revenge, given that he had drunk a potion Snape had sent him last semester, resulting in his hospitalization at St. Mungo's Hospital. Some students thought it was Harry and Ron. Harry was a given, and Ron had also been put into a cauldron by Snape before Christmas, a deep-seated grudge. Even the twins. Well, Professor Snape had far too many enemies, spanning almost all three houses. Everyone seemed like a suspect. Even Neville was on the list. However, many students, while jokingly discussing the culprit, suddenly burst into tears. Even Professor Snape received love letters. Whether it was a prank or not, at least it meant someone cared about him. And some people didn't even receive a single prank love letter. Who looked more like the clown? In this atmosphere, the twins, always fond of using their brains, started a love letter writing service. For just 10 nut, you could receive a love letter with nauseatingly cheesy language, 1 nut, and the card even had a bright red lipstick stain, making you look as presentable as you could in front of your friends. Even as the dinner party approached, the Great Hall was still bustling with noise, many students using the last few minutes to send out their love letters. At the Gryffindor table, Harry and Ron were whispering and discussing something. George and Fred walked over and sat down at the table. George asked, "Hey, I heard from Lee that you two were looking for us." Harry looked up, glancing around cautiously. "George, I want to ask you for a favor." "What is it?" Harry pulled a few mushrooms from his pocket and lowered his voice. "These are chicken gizzard mushrooms we stole from Professor Sprout's greenhouse. I need you to find a way to put them in Malfoy's food." "That's easy." Fred took the mushrooms and laughed. Although I don't know what you two are up to, we've been wanting to punish that kid for a while now." "Thanks then," Harry suddenly asked curiously, "why are your lips so red?" "Oh, George vigorously wiped the marks from the corner of his mouth and mumbled, "Maybe we ate too many strawberries." Fred changed the subject, patting Ron on the shoulder and laughing, "My dear little brother, you didn't get a single love letter today, did you?" "Who hasn't received one?" Ron carefully pulled a letter from his underwear, beaming with pride. "Who do you think you are?" "I have a love letter too." Fred reached for the letter, but Ron quickly stopped him, showing off. "See the lipstick mark on it?" Ron sniffed the perfume on the letter, his face radiating ecstasy. "The recipient must be a beauty, and she asked me to meet her this week. Are you going?" George asked, suppressing a laugh. "Of course I'm going." Ron touched the lipstick mark, his expression intoxicated. "George, Fred, I think I'm in love. Good luck, my silly little brother." Chapter 211 Lockhart Poisoned. Just as Ralph had suggested, rabbits appeared on the table at the dinner. They had been teaching tools in the Transfiguration class during the day, but after being frightened to death by the dwarves, they became dinner that night, spicy rabbit stew with mushrooms. The young wizards ate with great relish, seemingly venting their frustration from the tortures in Transfiguration class on the rabbit meat. "Serves you right for disobeying and enduring so much transfiguration." At the head table, there was also a plate of spicy rabbit stew with mushrooms, but no one ate it. Even Hagrid, after a quick glance, immediately gave up and began chugging butterbeer. Lockhart noticed this and hurriedly asked, "Hagrid, why aren't you eating?" "I don't like rabbit meat." Hagrid swallowed. "I think it's too oily, too thick, smells good, and tastes, cough cough. I mean, Professor Lockhart, please have some." "Professor Sprout, would you like to try some?" Lockhart asked again. "I don't want any, I don't want any." Professor Sprout quickly waved his hands. "I just ate in the kitchen. You know, the Hufflepuff common room is very close to the kitchen. It seems you often secretly treat yourself to special meals." Lockhart smiled and continued, "Professor Flitwick, you're not eating either." "Professor Lockhart, you should eat." Professor Flitwick glanced at the mushroom and said modestly, "You've worked hard all day, busy enlivening the atmosphere at Hogwarts. You need to eat more." "Professor Dumbledore, I don't like food getting stuck in my teeth. I'm old, my teeth aren't good, I can only eat liquids." Dumbledore refused with a smile. "If you're not eating, then I won't be polite." Lockhart dragged a whole plate of rabbit meat in front of him. This was his favorite dish. He didn't expect it to appear at the dinner party tonight. Of course, out of caution, Professor Lockhart still let Sasha taste it first, and only after seeing that the house elf had no problems did he begin to eat heartily. So delicious. All the teachers stared at Lockhart with strange looks as he stuffed the mushrooms into his mouth. Even Hagrid could recognize them as laughing mushrooms, which would cause hallucinations and strange behavior. But Lockhart didn't recognize them. That was unbelievable. But then again, Lockhart was a fraud, so it would be strange if he could recognize them. No one warned Lockhart, they just watched him eat the laughing mushrooms. Few professors could offend all the teachers at once. Even someone as obnoxious as Snape had the support of Filch and Slytherin students who were on good terms with him. Lockhart, however, was truly universally disliked. Everyone hoped he would get food poisoning and be bedridden for another semester. Halfway through his meal, Lockhart suddenly looked up, his eyes wide, his breathing becoming rapid. Professor Snape, sitting quietly to the side with a mocking smile on his face, asked slowly, "Professor Lockhart, how are you? Do you still recognize me?" Lockhart did not answer. His mind was completely in chaos, and he felt dizzy, as if surrounded by a series of funhouse mirrors. Hallucinations began to strike him. Sometimes he felt surrounded by a green mist that made him dizzy. Other times he felt himself engulfed in flames, the firelight flashing. Finally, Lockhart gradually adjusted to his surroundings, hearing the gurgling of a spring. He strained to look ahead and suddenly saw a blurry, alluring figure asking him in the gentlest of voices, "Professor Lockhart, how are you? Do you still recognize me?" Lockhart was somewhat dazed, trying to recall the owner of this heavenly voice. The image of Mrs. Sabine gradually surfaced in his mind. The blurry figure slowly transformed into Mrs. Sabine, bathing naked in the spring, gazing at him with seductive eyes. Lockhart's breathing quickened. He swallowed hard and said in a voice filled with savage desire, "Don't rush, I'm coming, Mrs. Sabine." Snape frowned at Lockhart, not expecting him to suddenly pounce on him with a greasy face and a lewd smile. Snape stood up in astonishment and backed away, but Lockhart relentlessly pursued him, even reaching out to touch his butt. Snape took 2 steps back, dodging Lockhart's blatant groping. "What the hell?" Snape delivered a vicious kick to Lockhart's groin, sending Lockhart flying backward. After falling, he immediately stood up, seemingly unfazed by the pain. It wasn't that Lockhart had mastered an iron groin technique, rather, after consuming the laughing mushroom, he was completely immersed in hallucinations. His body's tolerance for pain drastically increased. He'd get his comeuppance once he sobered up. But at this moment, Lockhart was still in a hallucination, grinning and saying, "Baby, don't run away. Let me touch you." The students stared in shock at this scene in the main seating area. Lockhart called Professor Snape "baby." Many female students were especially thrilled. They'd ship many couples, but never this one. It was such a rip-off. Snape raised his wand. He could easily knock Lockhart unconscious, but once unconscious, the laughing mushroom's effect would be gone. That would be too lenient on Lockhart. Yes, it was Snape who added the laughing mushroom to the rabbit meat. Why the laughing mushroom? Because the hallucinogenic effect of this mushroom only affects wizards, not their magical creatures. Even if Lockhart had a house elf test it, there wouldn't be any problems. As for Lockhart's fondness for rabbit meat, it's written in his books, and he often mentions it in class. A little investigation would reveal the truth. Snape thought for a moment, then put away his wand and strode towards the Great Hall's exit. Lockhart followed closely, seemingly determined to punish Snape on this Valentine's Day. The students exchanged bewildered glances, then stood up and ran towards the Great Hall to see what was happening. But before they even left the castle, Dumbledore stopped them, and everyone returned to the Great Hall, eagerly discussing the scene that had just unfolded. Professor Lockhart was a hidden male Kedone, but it's not unusual for him to whine like that. At the Slytherin table, Goyle and Crabbe were eating dessert when they both suddenly clutched their stomachs and ran towards the restrooms. Malfoy didn't think much of it, picking up a walnut mascarpone sandwich and slowly munching on it. But only 5 minutes later, he too clutched his rumbling stomach, left the Great Hall, and hurried down the empty corridor towards the men's restroom. Just as he reached the restroom, two figures suddenly emerged from the shadows, blocking his path. "Malfoy, I need to talk to you," Harry said. Malfoy clutched his stomach, trembling all over. "Couldn't you have waited a while?" He had diarrhea, and it was urgent. Chapter 2 will be released later, time uncertain. Chapter 212, a thrilling Valentine's Day night. Malfoy has a peculiar form of Potter compulsion. Simply put, if the two are in the same public area, Potter must be in his sight. If Potter disappears, Malfoy will actively search for him, wanting to know his every move, otherwise, he'll get very anxious. However, this compulsion definitely doesn't apply to public areas like toilets, especially when Malfoy has diarrhea. Malfoy tried to squeeze between Harry and Ron, but they both raised their wands, forcing him to stop. "Malfoy, I need to ask you something." Harry gripped his wand tightly. "Potter, wait until I'm done in the toilet." Malfoy gritted his teeth. "I don't have time for you now." "No, we're talking here," Harry said sternly. "You have no right to bargain." The two of them had stolen chicken gizzard mushrooms from the greenhouse and had the twins put them in Malfoy's food, all for this moment. Only a Malfoy with diarrhea could get him to tell the truth. "Don't even think about calling Goyle and Crabbe," Harry warned. "They're both sick with diarrhea too. They can't help you right now." "Did you two poison him?" Malfoy said bitterly. "We don't understand what you're saying." "But," Ron gloated, "you'd better answer our questions quickly, or you'll be in trouble. Weasley, you'd better not block my way, or I'll have my dad." Malfoy hadn't finished speaking when he clutched his stomach, a look of pain on his face. He gritted his teeth and said, "Just ask already." "How can I answer if you don't ask me? Did you open the Chamber of Secrets and attack Filch and Mrs. Pins?" "No, it wasn't me." Malfoy's face turned purple, and he trembled all over as he said, "The day Filch was attacked, I was in the Great Hall the whole time and didn't go out at all." "Then you must know who orchestrated all of this." "I don't know." Malfoy clutched his stomach and squatted on the ground. "I really don't know. I didn't do it." "You're lying," Harry shouted. "When Filch was attacked, there were writings on the wall. You weren't surprised at all. You already knew about it." "That's because Dad warned me that something might happen, but he didn't tell me who opened the Chamber of Secrets." Malfoy's legs trembled as he said, "My father wouldn't tell me about the Chamber of Secrets, and told me to mind my own business. He only said it was opened 50 years ago, but he wasn't even born then." "I swear I'm not lying. You don't know this, you don't know that, so what do you know?" "When the chamber was opened last time, a student named Myrtle died. That's all I know," Malfoy said. tears welling in his eyes. "Potter, let me go to the toilet." Malfoy felt he was about to burst. If he didn't go soon, a mudslide would erupt. "One last question. What did you and your father buy at Borgin and Burke's in Nocturne Alley during the summer holidays?" Harry asked softly. "Just some very valuable magical items." "Can I go now?" But Harry and Ron still blocked his way, not letting Malfoy off the hook. Not long ago, at Christmas, Malfoy had brought a newspaper to cause trouble, resulting in Gryffindor losing 30 points to Snape. Now was the time for revenge. Harry and Ron both grinned as Malfoy tried to break through the human wall, but was firmly blocked outside the toilet. The most painful thing in life is finishing in the toilet only to realize you forgot to bring toilet paper. Even more painful is wanting to use the toilet but being blocked outside. After the continued stalemate, a series of bubbling sounds filled the air, and a foul stench permeated the atmosphere. Malfoy's trembling stopped, his stomach ache subsided, and he felt a warm current flowing freely between his legs, comfortable. Harry and Ron both covered their noses. Harry waved his hand, disgusted, and said, "All right, you can go now." Malfoy walked towards the toilet expressionlessly, like a corpse, one step at a time, but just before reaching it, he suddenly turned and rammed into Harry. "If we're going to die, we'll die together." Harry was knocked to the ground, staring in horror as Malfoy's wet backside shoved into his face, as if he were a toilet. Ron quickly grabbed Malfoy's hair, trying to pull him away, but slipped on something and fell hard to the ground. Malfoy, extremely skilled in ground combat, used the spell Dragon Plays with 2 pearls, binding Harry and Ron with death coil. The three of them wrestled all the way from the corridor to the toilets, the avenue, worn smooth by the excrement. When the banquet ended, Professor Snape hadn't returned. The students, led by their prefects, left the Great Hall, but as soon as they reached the stairs, they heard a piercing scream in the distance. Had another attack occurred? The young wizards followed the screams, running towards the corridor, but as they approached the toilets, they suddenly slowed down and covered their noses. A stench filled the corridor, filth was everywhere, spreading from the corridor all the way to the toilets. Even on the walls, there were 3 clear, different-sized yellow handprints. What was going on? Everyone proceeded cautiously, afraid of accidentally stepping on a landmine. Reaching the toilet door, they peered inside, and saw Harry, Malfoy, and Ron sitting on the floor. All 3 were incredibly disheveled, as if they had just swum in a septic tank. Harry even had cauliflower on his head. Ron pushed through the crowd into the toilet and asked, "What happened?" Malfoy pointed tremblingly to a toilet stall. Ron went over and squinted. Lying unconscious on the floor of the stall was Goyle, covered in wounds, wisps of smoke rising from them. He looked exactly like Filch and Mrs. Pants. Peeves popped out of the wall, giggling and doing somersaults before yelling at the top of his lungs, "Attack! Attack! Attack again! Run for your lives! They're attacking students again!" "Shut up, Peeves," Ralph said softly. "Go get Professor Dumbledore." Peeves stuck his tongue out at Ralph and hurriedly slipped through the wall. Soon, Dumbledore arrived, banging his wand loudly, and the students fell silent. Dumbledore looked at Goyle, then at Harry and the others, who were covered in filth. A few minutes later, Professor Snape rushed into the toilet, his face initially beaming, but he froze at the sight before him. "Where's Professor Lockhart?" Dumbledore asked, looking up. "Him," Snape drawled. "He just slipped and fell into the Black Lake, and apparently got snatched by a mermaid." Ralph sighed softly. This Valentine's Day night was truly thrilling. Chapter 213 Mermaid Traditions. In the headmaster's office, after listening to Harry and Ron's explanation, Professor McGonagall remained silent. She sat motionless in her chair, not even bothering to purse her lips, simply sitting there expressionless. Harry and Ron both lowered their heads, unable to look Professor McGonagall in the eye. A loud shout from her would have been better, but her silence was even more frightening. Professor McGonagall was silent, but Professor Snape wasn't about to let such a good opportunity for mockery slip by. He circled around, a malicious smile spreading across his face. "So, if I'm not mistaken, you two think that Malfoy opened the Chamber of Secrets to deliberately poison him, is that right?" Harry and Ron were speechless. What kind of comprehension was that? "Professor Snape, we never intended to poison Malfoy. Chicken of the woods mushrooms aren't poison, at worst, they'll just give you diarrhea," Harry explained again. "We just wanted to catch Malfoy in the toilet and find out what happened in the Chamber of Secrets." "Oh, I see." Snape stopped in the corner, half his body hidden in shadow, looking rather sinister, but his expression was very strange, as if he was desperately trying not to laugh. Do you know that feeding poisonous mushrooms to classmates is against school rules and even illegal, Potter? Harry hesitated, then thought for a moment and explained, we just wanted to catch whoever opened the Chamber of Secrets. Malfoy is a prime suspect. Good heavens, Potter, what's wrong with your head again? Professor Snape expressed his shock in an exaggerated tone. You think Malfoy is highly suspicious, so you investigate like this? And you want to catch the person who opened the Chamber of Secrets? Who do you think you are? The headmaster of Hogwarts, the headmaster of the Aurors, or the Minister of Magic? Potter, do you think the murderer can't be caught without you? That we'll all be killed. I don't think so, Harry shouted. But that's what I see. You're always so self-absorbed. I don't know where you learned this habit, Snape sneered. Last semester, you suspected me of trying to steal the Philosopher's Stone, and that you and Weasley broke school rules by going to the 4th floor's restricted area to steal the Philosopher's Stone, and then you met Quirrell. It's only been half a year, hasn't it? Half a year? I thought you'd learned your lesson, but it's back to its old ways, and you're starting to suspect Malfoy? Who will you suspect next? Professor McGonagall, or Dumbledore? Snape mocked. Arrogant, haughty, stupid, self-righteous. You're so much like your father, Potter. He was extremely arrogant too. You two are terribly alike. Harry's eyes widened as he glared at Snape. Still staring? Believe me or not, I'll find you a new place to keep your eyes. Snape stared intently into Harry's eyes, his thin face filled with malice. Potter, look at all the trouble you've caused since you enrolled. The Philosopher's Stone, flying cars, making classmates eat poisonous mushrooms. Why is it always you? Harry opened his mouth. Though he was very unhappy, he couldn't seem to find a reason to refute. My suggestion is to send him to the neighboring Ivory Morny School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The portrait of the headmaster on the wall, Phineas, gloated, with Potter and Weasley causing trouble, at least that school's educational evaluation ranking will drop considerably. Send a few more troublemakers like that to other schools, and in less than 2 years, Hogwarts' ranking will be back to number 1. Professor McGonagall, is there anything else you'd like to say? Snape turned and asked. I have nothing to say, Professor Snape, Professor McGonagall said calmly. According to school rules, you should be expelled for doing such a thing. We'll see what Professor Dumbledore decides when he returns. Professor McGonagall, don't expel us, Harry and Ron cried out desperately. You're incorrigible. How can I forgive you? McGonagall said softly. Is it really that hard to learn to follow school rules in a year? Maybe I'm just not capable enough. I don't know how to educate you two anymore. You can transfer to Slytherin, Professor Snape said with a wicked grin. But the headmaster has to give me permission to use corporal punishment. I will discipline Potter properly, and perhaps he will have a chance to become a model student. Harry almost nodded. He would rather go to Slytherin and be humiliated by Snape than be expelled from Hogwarts. Just then, Professor Dumbledore pushed open the door and walked in. Snape's expression became even more delighted. Professor McGonagall stood up and asked with concern, How are you, Professor Dumbledore? Mr. Malfoy and Mr. Crabbe are both fine, but Mr. Goyle suffered a serious injury, and like Filch, he needs to rest for a while. Harry and Ron both breathed a sigh of relief. It was a stroke of luck that no one had died. Professor Dumbledore, what should we do with these two? Snape began. Last term it was the Philosopher's Stone, a few months ago it was the flying car, and now they've fed their classmates poisonous mushrooms, leaving them alone and in danger. If it were any other student, they would be expelled, or at least suspended indefinitely. If you continue to indulge them without severe punishment, who knows what terrible things Potter and Weasley might do in the future. Dumbledore's expression was unusually serious. His gaze followed a bridge of his nose down to Harry and Ron. After a long silence, he said softly, suspension is unnecessary. Give them a probationary period. Gryffindor will also lose 200 points because of you two. Dumbledore paused and said, if they behave like this again, I will have no choice but to expel them. Snape pouted, seemingly somewhat unconvinced, but didn't say anything. After all, this punishment was better than a meaningless deduction of points. Headmaster, what about Professor Lockhart? Professor McGonagall asked again. Was he rescued? Not yet. Dumbledore shook his head. I just spoke with Mercus, the leader of the merfolk, but she won't release him. Why? 2 years ago, on Christmas Eve, Someone caught a merfolk while fishing in the Black Lake and knocked her unconscious with a stick. What does that have to do with Professor Lockhart? McGonagall hesitated. He wasn't at Hogwarts 2 years ago. Professor Quirrell was in charge. That's the problem, Dumbledore said, his head aching. The merfolk who was beaten insists that Professor Lockhart did it. What was his purpose? Professor McGonagall asked curiously. Was he demanding compensation? No, not at all. Dumbledore's expression was strange. According to merfolk tradition, when they go on blind dates, they knock out the merfolk they like with a stick and drag them back to their cave. If they succeed, they become husband and wife. That merfolk woman believes Lockhart knocked her unconscious, and she demands to marry Lockhart before she will release him. We must respect the traditions and customs of the mermaids, Professor Snape quickly said. Chapter 2 will be released later, around 1 p.m. Chapter 214 Truth Potion completed. In the days that followed, everyone was still buzzing about Valentine's Day. In previous years, students rarely discussed the holiday. It was mostly just couples showing off their affection, sneaking off to the reeds by Black Lake, or gossiping about who was with whom. Nothing new. But this year's Valentine's Day was truly unforgettable. From the Valentine's Day cards to the unintentionally revealed incredible couple, Lockhart and Snape, everyone was deeply impressed. One was the epitome of professorial good looks, the other a far cry from it. Who would have thought they had such a special relationship? It just goes to show, love makes people blind. Everyone then realized that the love letter Professor Snape received that day was actually from Lockhart. Professor Lockhart certainly knew how to liven up the atmosphere, single-handedly elevating the holiday to a level beyond his reach. The only pity was that Lockhart accidentally fell into Black Lake, and no one saw him for the next few days. Surely he didn't drown? Those students who bet on Lockhart's death in February are already gearing up for popping champagne, but most students still hope he lives. Otherwise, who will fill the void? If the Lockhart and Snape pairing was the grand finale, then the real spectacle was Harry, Ron, and Malfoy smearing excrement on the walls of the corridor and having a snowball fight in the toilet. While others were playing ball control and frisbee, these three were playing with poop in the toilet. No one could understand their state of mind at the time. It can only be said that Harry and his friends elevated this celebration, building upon Lockhart's story, to a realm beyond the reach of ordinary people. However, after a school-wide announcement, everyone was in an uproar. Potter and Weasley were placed on probation and had 200 Gryffindor points deducted. Point deductions are just routine punishments and not worth discussing, but the probation punishment is worth pondering. It's important to understand that probation is second only to expulsion in severity, and such a harsh punishment hasn't been seen for many years. Many young wizards also noticed that the notice didn't mention Malfoy, and coupled with Goyle's attack, this sensitive timing made it hard not to draw conclusions. Many students believe that Harry and Ron were the culprits who opened the Chamber of Secrets and attacked Filch and Mrs. Pins. Otherwise, why would they only receive probation, and not Malfoy? As a result, wherever Harry and Ron went, everyone avoided them like the plague. Harry felt okay. He had just experienced social humiliation and lost 200 points in Gryffindor, so he was happy that no one greeted him, preventing embarrassment. But Ron was very upset. He had finally received a love letter from a witch, and he had planned to meet her. Now he was definitely doomed. But unexpectedly, the mysterious witch sent him several more letters, all encouraging, and even included a kiss mark, making Ron overjoyed, and he began writing to her every day, exchanging heartfelt words. Inside the black leather case, a group of giant dung beetles were pushing a perfectly round ball of dung, preparing to take it home for a leisurely meal. The avian snake flew in midair, quietly following the dung beetles. Once it spotted its prey, it suddenly grew several meters large, opened its blood-red maw, and swallowed the dung beetle whole. But suddenly, an arm appeared above the avian snake's head, swiftly pressing down on its head, forcing it to change direction. It missed its bite, and its head slammed heavily to the ground. The sudden commotion startled the dung beetles, who scattered and fled, quickly burrowing into the soft mud, trying to escape the avian snake's predation. The arm, which had stretched over 3 meters long like rubber, retracted. The boy sitting in the chair calmly turned a page of the magic book in his hand. Ralph glanced at his arm and smiled with satisfaction. The avian snake's Gigantamax and partial Gigantamax spells were indeed excellent. He seemed to have eaten the rubber fruit, the human fruit, mythical zoan type, Nika form, allowing him to freely extend his arms like Luffy. Of course, This extension was limited, certainly not as unrestrained as the rubber fruit. Sherry was treating a moon-obsessed beast when she caught a glimpse of Love's strange shape-shifting technique out of the corner of her eye, which wasn't surprising. This kind of shape-shifting technique, which could suddenly enlarge, thicken, and lengthen the body, fell under the category of human shape-shifting. Sherry knew Love's shape-shifting skills were definitely not at this level, but he always managed to master some strange magic. "Love, there seems to be something in this little guy's eyes, can you take a look?" Sherry encountered a difficult case and quickly sought help from the sidelines. Love put down his spellbook, moved his chair, and began to examine the moon-obsessed beast. Sherry raised her wand, the tip of which lit up, carefully shining light on the boy so he could see more clearly. Under the light, a tentacle in the moonfox's eye flickered and quickly retracted. "What's that?" Shirley asked. "A greenback worm, it's a parasitic insect that lives in the eyes of animals." Ralph picked up the pliers, waited carefully for a moment, and then quickly pinched the tentacle in the moonfox's eye. He pulled out a greenback worm that looked like a spider and threw it into the air. The bird snake, which had been sulking, immediately opened its mouth and swallowed the worm. "All right, it's okay now," Ralph patted the moonfox's head. Shirley sat quietly to the side, recalling Ralph's technique. She thought for a moment and suddenly said, "By the way, Ralph, I went to Professor McGonagall's office today and saw a list on her desk." "What list?" Ralph raised his eyebrows. "A list of students who left the Great Hall at both last Halloween and this year's Valentine's Day dinners," Shirley said softly. "The list was on the table, I saw it by chance." Ralph narrowed his eyes and asked, "Do you still remember the names?" "Yes, I wrote them down and copied them onto paper when I got home." Shirley pulled a piece of parchment from her mouth. Ralph took the list and quickly glanced through it. The list wasn't long because the attacks occurred within a specific time frame. Not many students left the Great Hall at that time. Even fewer left both dinners, which is why Shirley remembered it after only a few glances. The boy's gaze sharpened, settling on an unexpected name, Percy Weasley. Just then, footsteps sounded in the distance. Ralph looked up and saw a figure running frantically towards him from the other end of the cabin. Hermione approached, panting, one hand on her waist, and grinned at Ralph and Shirley. "The truth potion is ready." Chapter 215 Scamander, the Mermaid Best Man. After more than half a year, Hermione finally succeeded in brewing the veritable potion. Even many adult wizards couldn't brew such a difficult potion, yet Hermione managed it in her second year, demonstrating her true talent in potions. Unfortunately, the veritable potion couldn't work yet because Dobby hadn't been captured. Dobby was a house elf who lived in the Malfoy family manor and occasionally apparated to the school to take care of Harry, never showing himself otherwise. Capturing him and administering the veritable potion wouldn't be easy. The breakthrough lay with Draco, who was essentially Dobby's master and could summon him to Hogwarts to administer the potion. However, Draco wasn't at Hogwarts. Although he wasn't injured, the Valentine's Day incident, the struggle with Harry in the toilet and witnessing Goyle's horrific state, had been too much for him, and his father had sent him to St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Arts. The chances of capturing Dobby before Draco returned were slim. Draco's departure wasn't all bad, at least in the February Quidditch match. Slytherin was missing a seeker. To assemble the team, Captain Frings recalled former seeker Terrence Higgins, putting him back in the starting lineup. Perhaps it was resentment at losing a starting position, or perhaps his skills had rusted from a long absence, or maybe Higgins fixed a match, betting on Slytherin to lose. The exact reason remains unknown, but Terrence Higgins' performance upon his return was disastrous. He repeatedly fouled, gifting penalties to opposing players, and even knocked down his own captain, Frings, causing Flint to fall off his broom. Ultimately, Slytherin suffered a crushing defeat to Gryffindor. Professor McGonagall was practically grinning from ear to ear in the stands. Colin Creevey even secretly photographed Slytherin fans with exposed underwear. It was indeed a wardrobe malfunction photo. Only 30 minutes into the match, the score difference had already reached triple digits. Led by Snape, the Slytherin students decisively left the arena. They wouldn't stand for this. Gryffindor also desperately needed this big win, as Harry was temporarily unable to play after being placed on probation, and the team could only find a very weak temporary substitute. With their opponents all having their own problems, it was normal for Hufflepuff Quidditch to lead the standings, but what was surprising was that Ravenclaw was in second place. After changing their seeker to Cho Chang, This perennial underdog team had suddenly risen, as if their strength had regressed to 20 years ago overnight. The match between Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw was crucial. Whoever won would take first place. Ravenclaw, who were usually at the bottom, now had a chance to compete for first place, giving the Ravenclaw students a false sense of security. They were very strong this year. The Hawks, having been suppressed for too long, were now somewhat complacent, even boasting wildly before the match that they and Hufflepuff Quidditch were arch rivals. Unfortunately, Hufflepuff won the game cleanly, maintaining their 9-year winning streak against Ravenclaw. Who's your arch rival? A true arch rival is one with back-and-forth battles. Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw are more like father versus son. As March arrived, the weather warmed, the sun shone brightly, the spring breeze was gentle, the lawns were lush and green, and the whomping willow sprouted new buds, its branches swaying in the wind. The weather was perfect for a day out, but the atmosphere at school remained tense. All the students were on high alert, only daring to wander in the library and common rooms. Suddenly, the young wizards, following Quirrell's example, began selling amulets and talismans. Not only amethyst and silverware, but even garlic and crosses were selling like hotcakes. Some students were even selling werewolf teeth, supposedly for protection when worn around the neck. Neville even spent a fortune buying several werewolf teeth to give to Ralph and his friends. Ralph recognized the dog teeth at a glance. They were just a cheap imitation. The seller ended up paying 3 times the price as compensation, 3 more dog teeth. With Filch and Mrs. Pins injured, and Lockhart missing, the school was short-staffed. Professor Snape naturally took on the role of substitute defense against the dark arts teacher again. Defense against the dark arts class, a large box sat on the podium, emanating a terrifying, half-sucking, half-groaning sound, accompanied by a foul odor like that of a sewer. Inside the box was a chameleon ghoul. Ghouls were familiar to wizards. They were ugly creatures, resembling slimy, buck-toothed ogres. Ghouls preferred to live in attics of human houses and weren't particularly dangerous, just annoying because of their constant groaning. But chameleon ghouls were different. While still a type of ghoul, they were violent and possessed a magical layer on their skin that allowed them to disguise themselves as everyday objects, attacking when a wizard approached. Even the Ministry of Magic had formed a special ghoul squad to drive away the color-changing ghouls in wizarding residences. Snape was instructing his students on how to deal with color-changing ghouls. Now, who can tell me the difference between a color-changing ghoul and a regular ghoul? Snape paced back and forth in the classroom, his black robes billowing behind him. His dark eyes suddenly fixed on Neville, and he chuckled. "Let's hear Mr. Longbottom's opinion." Neville stood up tremblingly. He had reviewed this material with Ralph and even memorized it several times, but his mind was completely blank. Ralph's lips moved slightly, whispering a reminder to Neville, while Sherry lightly nudged Ralph with her foot to silence the boy. Snape had silently appeared behind them, his eyes gleaming with malice through his greasy black hair. "Scamander, you seem to have a lot to say about this," Snape sneered in a greasy voice. "But I'm asking Longbottom a question now, so don't interrupt." Hufflepuff, 5 points deducted. "And Miss Swinton, you just dirted Scamander's shoes." Ravenclaw, 5 points deducted. Sherry, well, they're different colors," Neville stammered. "Color-changing ghouls change color." "Oh, very well, you can already say things that even a 5-year-old knows," Snape mocked. "Clearly, Professor Lockhart's genius education has paid off on you." Many people laughed. Speaking of Professor Lockhart, Snape paused for a moment, then smiled. "I think you're all curious about where he is, aren't you?" Everyone looked up at Snape. Lockhart had been missing for several weeks, and no one had mentioned him, as if he had never existed. Everyone really wanted to know where he had gone. Even if he had fallen into the Black Lake and drowned, there should at least be a body, right? "I might as well tell you. Lockhart is at the bottom of Black Lake. He's getting married to a mermaid soon." Snape grinned. "You might receive an invitation in a while," the students murmured amongst themselves, processing this shocking news. "By the way, Scamander, go to Black Lake after class. Dumbledore is waiting for you there." "Did he say what it's about, Professor?" Ralph asked cautiously. "Lockhart is getting married to a mermaid, and you need to be his best man," Snape said gleefully. "Just a heads up, according to mermaid tradition, the best man sleeps with the mermaid bride at night." Chapter 216. The veterinarian is online. After class, Ralph walked down the corridor toward Black Lake. Shirley seemed a little worried and followed him. Walking along the road, the girl whispered, "It's all right, It's definitely not a prank. Professor Snape wouldn't go to the Black Lake for no reason. That kind of trick is too low level. It's more worrying if it's not a prank. Sherry wrinkled her nose. Professor Lockhart is getting married to a mermaid. Why would he need you as a groomsman? You believe that? Ralph chuckled. Sherry, Professor Snape is a liar. Only believe half of what he says. Never trust him. Dumbledore is probably waiting for me at the Black Lake, but there's no groomsman involved. Is that so? Sherry glanced at Ralph in surprise, her beautiful brows furrowing. How could Professor Snape talk such nonsense? Ralph stepped over the stairs, shielding his eyes from the glaring sunlight, and said softly with a smile, "You're so naive, you'll get fooled sooner or later." The girl with the ponytail pursed her lips, then suddenly smiled, gently shaking her fist. "Isn't there you?" The two walked across the lawn toward the Black Lake, encountering Hagrid along the way. He was mowing the lawn, looking rather troubled, his face devoid of any smile. "Hey, Hagrid," Ralph greeted, asking, "Need any help?" "No, it's nothing, Ralph." Hagrid picked up the clump of grass he had just trimmed, then suddenly remembered something, glaring at the two of them. "Where are you two going? It's too dangerous lately. You're not allowed to wander around like that." "No, Professor Snape told us to go find Professor Dumbledore," Ralph explained. "Have you seen him?" "Oh, Dumbledore." Hagrid thought for a moment, then said, "I just saw him walking alone by the Black Lake." "Okay, thank you." After confirming it wasn't a prank, Ralph asked softly, "Hagrid, what's wrong? You look so down." Hagrid hesitated, glancing around before lowering his voice. "I'm telling you too, but you absolutely mustn't tell anyone else." Ralph and Sherry both nodded. "A long time ago, I kept a very small, very cute spider in the Forbidden Forest, and I named it Aragog." Ralph raised his eyebrows. Hagrid's description was so different from that of the giant spider. "Small and cute? Cute my foot." "But just before Christmas, Aragog was kidnapped by a wizard," Hagrid said dejectedly. "It's still missing, of course." Ralph had kidnapped Aragog, but he couldn't say it out loud. He cautiously asked, "Do you know who kidnapped it?" "I don't know, but Aragog's children told me it was a young wizard and a centaur." Hagrid sighed. "That young wizard even claimed to be my friend. Since he said he was your friend, maybe he'll be returned soon." Ralph comforted him. "But I'm worried it might be poachers," Hagrid said anxiously. "Aragog is very old, and his eyesight is failing. I'm really concerned for his safety." "Then why don't you ask the centaur tribe?" Ralph asked again. "Aren't there centaurs around, Alice? The centaur tribe is under martial law recently, didn't you know?" Hagrid said seriously. "Around Christmas, it said a car drove through the Forbidden Forest and hit Bane, breaking several of his ribs. Centaurs are very hostile towards wizards now. You'd better not go to the Forbidden Forest recently." "I understand, thank you for reminding me," Ralph nodded. After saying goodbye to Hagrid, they continued towards the Black Lake. Shirley whispered, "What about the giant eight-eyed spider in the box? Once it's healed, release it back into the Forbidden Forest." Ralph thought for a moment and said, "Only Aragog can control the giant eight-eyed spider colony, but it won't live for many more years. We need to find a giant eight-eyed spider that can manage the colony beforehand." They soon arrived at the edge of the Black Lake and saw a large squid in the distance, basking in the warm, shallow water. Professor Dumbledore stood beside it, gently stroking its tentacles, and the squid seemed to enjoy being petted. Hearing footsteps, the old man turned around and smiled. "Good afternoon. It seems Professor Snape relayed my message. I was just wondering if he would pretend to forget." "Professor Snape didn't forget, but he did make some changes to your words," Ralph quickly interjected while Snape was away. "He said Lockhart is going to marry a mermaid and needs me to be his best man." Dumbledore chuckled and shook his head. "That's not true, but I do need you to come with me to the merfolk village." "What for?" Ralph asked curiously. "A mermaid in the village is sick, and their healer is helpless." "They want my help," Dumbledore said softly. "That's when I thought of you, Ralph. Professor Lockhart fell into the Black Lake and was captured by the mermaids. If I can help heal him, the mermaid chieftain is willing to release him," the old man explained slowly. "No problem, but whether it can be cured or not, we'll only know after seeing the patient." As a professional veterinarian, Ralph certainly wouldn't refuse a merman patient. He hesitated. "How do we get to the bottom of the lake?" "Ride this big guy." Dumbledore pointed to the giant squid basking in the shallows, his beard twitching slightly. "It will take us to the bottom of the lake." Ralph and Sherry both looked at the squid, which sprayed a large cloud of ink into the air like fireworks. "If there are no problems, let's set off now." Dumbledore jumped onto the squid, with Ralph and Sherry following closely behind. At Dumbledore's command, the giant squid swam towards the center of the lake and then slowly sank. The headmaster waved his wand again, and the three of them were enveloped in a large cloud of bubbles, diving underwater. The giant squid swam deeper and deeper, heading towards the center of the lake. The light gradually dimmed, and the surrounding lake water looked dark and hazy. Numerous fish swam towards them from a distance. Ralph and Sherry, perched on the squid's back, gazed at the lake as if they were in an aquarium. Soon, a large group of mermaids appeared, chasing the squid, but none dared approach, merely following from a distance. After a long while, the squid finally reached the deep enough lake bed. There lay a small mermaid village, its rough stone dwellings speckled with algae. The mermaid leader, Mercus, stood in the square, awaiting their arrival. Upon seeing the giant squid, she quickly waved and called out, "Play music, thanks to Just Love Waiting in the Water for the generous donation." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 217 Newt's Childhood Sweetheart. Centaurs are good at divination, mermaids are good at singing and dancing. Newt once described these two species in this way, and from what Ralph had seen and heard, it was indeed quite insightful. He slid down the back of the giant squid and looked towards the center of the square. He saw a large group of mermaids singing songs in girlish voices, their voices ethereal and melodious, the water rustling as if in harmony. If one ignored the mermaid's ugly appearance, it was indeed a beautiful scene. The three of them walked towards the center of the square. Dumbledore, who was at the front, sighed, "Welcoming guests with songs is a custom of mermaids. I've always wanted to invite them to sing the Hogwarts school song at the opening banquet, but unfortunately." Shirley walked alongside Ralph. She looked up at the headmaster and asked in confusion, "They don't want to go to Hogwarts." "It's not that, but out of the water, the mermaid songs become noise," Dumbledore said regretfully. Seeing the girls' continued confusion, Ralph patiently explained, "Mermaid songs sound beautiful in the water, but become harsh and grating on land. Even when recorded, a mermaid's voice is dependent on the medium through which it travels. It sounds completely different depending on the medium." Of course, saying it's entirely dependent on the medium isn't entirely accurate. Like Ralph and his companions, currently inside a magical air bubble, the sound still sounds beautiful. In other words, the primary medium for a mermaid's song to travel is water. Thus, even if a wizard stands on the shore, they will still hear the song. If the mermaid sings from the shore, even if the wizard is underwater, they will still hear noise. The answer is magic. "Albus, my old friend," the mermaid leader swam over. Her eyes were yellow, she wore a large string of seashells around her neck, and a garment woven from seaweed. She had a long, thin, blue tail with gleaming scales, her upper body was iron gray, and her long, dark green hair was messy and unkempt, even messier than Hermione's. If it weren't for her bulging chest, Rove truly wouldn't have been able to tell she was a female mermaid. She was undeniably ugly. It's hard to imagine such a beautiful voice coming from these mermaids. What a waste of that enchanting singing voice. However, not all mermaids are ugly, their appearance is related to the temperature they live in. Temperature is a very special force, it can influence the sex of some animals, like crocodiles and turtles. Higher temperatures cause eggs to develop into females, while lower temperatures cause them to develop into males. Temperature also determines the appearance of different subspecies of mermaids. Mermaids living in cold waters are generally ugly, like monsters. As the water temperature rises, mermaids become very beautiful, especially those living in tropical waters, each one a stunning beauty. They are often described as mermaids. Unfortunately, the mermaids of Black Lake belong to the cold water category. After greeting Dumbledore, the mermaid leader asked, "So, did you like my new song?" "Beautiful music, Mercus," Dumbledore exclaimed. "I almost want to stay here forever." They spoke in mermaid language, which neither Ralph nor Sherry understood. Dumbledore, as the greatest wizard of the 20th century, was not only renowned for defeating Grindelwald but also for his countless magical achievements. He was also a master of magical creature languages, having worked with Newt to compile many languages and scripts on the verge of extinction. Mercus, the mermaid leader, glanced at the two young wizards behind him and narrowed her eyes. Albus, don't tell me these are the healers you brought? Have they graduated from Hogwarts? Not yet, Dumbledore said cheerfully. But Madame Pomfrey only knows how to heal wizards and has no experience with mermaids. Ralph is different. Let me introduce you. Ralph, Dumbledore spoke in English at the end, and Ralph quickly stepped forward, nodding. Hello, Madam, my name is Ralph Scamander, and this is my assistant, Shirley Swinton. Scamander, Mercus's eyes suddenly lit up, and she asked hastily, what is your relationship with Newt Scamander, Madam? That's my grandfather. Do you know him? Ralph asked cautiously. More than just acquaintances, he and I were best friends back in Hogwarts. I was only a teenager then, in the prime of my youth. Mercus's eyes held a mixture of regret and nostalgia as she sighed. Newt was a really interesting boy, gentle yet a little serious. He almost drowned when he fell into the lake, and I even saved him. He even slept in my bed. Mercus paused, then continued, slept in my bed. Ralph took a breath. Could he just finish in one sentence instead of pausing? That was too shocking. But his expression remained strange. What? Newt had a romantic affair with this mermaid queen, Mercus, back in school? That would be quite a story. At least Tina would probably find it very interesting. Later, your grandfather was expelled. I wanted him to stay at Black Lake, but he refused, Mercus said, growing increasingly angry. He went to America and was seduced by an ugly hag named Tina Goldstein. Damn it, am I not pretty? Ralph thought to himself. Anyone with eyes could tell who was prettier, Tina or Mercus. Let's go see the patient first, Dumbledore interrupted. Oh, and I'd like to see Professor Lockhart. No problem. Mercus immediately became more agreeable. Ralph suddenly understood why Dumbledore had sent him to see the patient. He wanted to play the Newt card. The group walked forward, looking around. More and more stone houses appeared, and mermaids poured out, curiously staring at them, pointing, and whispering amongst themselves. Many stone houses had Grindylows chained to their doors, hissing when they saw Ralph and the others. Grindylows are horned green sea monsters, but the mermaids have tamed them, much like Muggle pet dogs. Mercus and Ralph chatted warmly. Ralph, no child either, responded impeccably, his words polite yet never distant. Dumbledore, meanwhile, gazed with interest at the ancient murals on the rocks, depicting many two-tailed mermaids holding spears, guarding a small island. Passing a small stone dwelling, a figure approached the window, shouting, Professor Dumbledore, are you here to save me? Please save me, wah, I'm dying. Lockhart seemed to have taken some herbs, allowing him to remain underwater for extended periods. After more than a month, he had become much thinner. However, he looked more like he had been exploited, with thick dark circles under his eyes. A mermaid floating in the yard, seeing Lockhart's condition, rushed into the house. Ralph glanced at the mermaid. It seemed to be the one they knocked unconscious 2 Christmases ago, though his memory was hazy from that time. What surprised Ralph, however, was her belly was slightly swollen. She seemed pregnant. Could it be? Professor Lockhart was that efficient. Chapter 2 later. Thanks to Standing in the Sea for the donation. Chapter 218 The Two-Tailed Mermaid Missera. Dumbledore stayed behind to discuss some matters with Professor Lockhart. Ralph and his companions continued onward, heading towards a massive house. Soon, they ascended a wide, white stone staircase into a brightly lit hall. Many marble mermaids lined the path, holding bowls of burning whale oil for illumination. The walls, floors, and ceilings of the house were constructed of stone, the rock faces painted with various magical creatures. On their way up to the hall, Ralph stepped over painted crabs, clams, and starfish, creatures hidden among tangled black seaweed and the bones of drowned sailors. The walls on either side were painted with a deep blue-green of the sea, pale sharks darting through the water, and eels and octopuses slithering among the rocks. Behind the platform, in the dark, vivid waves, a two-tailed mermaid and a gray sea monster were locked in a fierce battle. As Ralph observed the murals, he asked curiously, was that mermaid pregnant? Yes, but don't worry, Azir's husband is dead, Mercus chuckled. The child won't even know who its biological father is. Good heavens, is Lockhart still going to take the fall? Sure enough, the double curse of dark magic defense in Lady Sabine is unbearable, but Lockhart just won't listen. Ralph hesitated for a moment before asking, who am I supposed to treat? He felt it necessary to find out beforehand, lest he end up being burdened with this too. The patient is named Marcella, a mermaid from another sea, From a very powerful clan we call the Golden Family. Mercus was silent for a moment, then said seriously, "Child, you must heal Myrcella. At least don't let anything happen to her here, madam. My skills are limited. I can only say I'll try my best," Ralph said, preparing himself for the worst. "Come on, this way." Mercus led Ralph and Sherry down a long corridor to a bedroom. Pushing open the door, they entered a room of moderate size. The room was quite warm, at least 7 or 8 degrees warmer than the water outside. A bed made from a giant clamshell sat in the corner, upon which a mermaid curled up. If Mercus was monstrous, then Myrcella truly deserved the title of mermaid. She was probably only 16 or 17 years old, with curly, fluffy blonde hair and flawless, snow-white skin. Her upper body and hips were humanoid, but from her hips onwards, she was fish-shaped, a golden fish tail that shimmered in the water. Moreover, she wasn't a single-tailed fish, but a two-tailed mermaid. Myrcella was also wearing a silver seaweed-woven dress, her figure slender and delicate, which actually concealed her fuller figure. "Myrcella, I've invited a healer from the wizard for you," Mercus said softly. Myrcella looked very weak. She gently straightened up, her long tail rising and falling, creating splashes of white water. "Thank you, Mercus." Myrcella looked sickly and listless, but her voice was still melodious and clear, like a nightingale's. Ralph walked over and sat down beside the bed. He reached out and grasped Myrcella's slender fish tail, when suddenly a thought popped into his head. A young domesticated mermaid has been detected, triggering side quest 1, help Myrcella cure her dropsy. Reward, mermaid language. Side quest 2, help Myrcella heal from her curse. Reward magic, siren song. Your song can bewitch animals like a siren, making them obey your commands. Side quest 3, achieve 100% taming of Myrcella. Reward magic. Mermaid's appearance, you can transform your legs into a fish tail, swimming freely in the water like a mermaid. Quest incomplete. Ralph held Myrcella's tail, and when he ran his fingers between the scales, he could clearly feel the girl's suppressed trembling. For mermaids, the most sensitive part is the tail, like a girl's feet, not something anyone can touch casually. "I'm a healer, physical contact is normal, don't be nervous," Ralph reminded her. Myrcella's ears turned bright red, and she remained silent. Only the places that were touched sent shivers of pleasure through her. Rove examined the fish carefully and quickly found the problem based on the system reward prompt. A large patch of golden scales stood upright, spreading outwards like a pine cone. The scale sacs at the base of the scales were swollen, filled with translucent exudate, causing the scales to stand upright. "You have droplet scale disease," Rove said quickly. "What's the cause?" Myrcella asked softly in human language. "There are many possible causes, such as Aeromonas hydrophila, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, Aeromonas hydrophila, etc. All could cause this disease," Rove explained. "But ultimately, it's because she suddenly arrived in the extremely cold waters of England and is not adapting well to the environment. Myrcella is so beautiful, clearly a tropical mermaid. She came to the Black Lake in the cold weather of February or March. It would be strange if she didn't get sick." Rove was very curious why a tropical mermaid would travel all the way to England. "Can it be cured?" Mercus asked hurriedly. "Inject streptomycin internally, administer norfloxacin in solution, and then soak the scales in Rivenol," Rove said calmly. "Also, administer a saline bath while using the above treatments. The effect is remarkable." The boy spoke quickly, but Shirley's hands moved even faster. By the time he finished speaking, the girl had already written it all down on parchment and handed it to Mercus. "Thank you," Myrcella whispered. "You're welcome." Rove met Myrcella's gaze and smiled tentatively. "If you had come to England in June or July, you wouldn't have had these problems." Myrcella didn't speak. Rove stood up and left the room with Shirley. Just then, Dumbledore returned. The old man smiled and asked, "How did it go?" "Just a rectal dysfunction, not too serious. It should be fully healed in about 2 weeks." Ralph didn't mention the curse, only saying softly, "But it's strange, why would she come to England at this time of year?" "That's unclear, but every few decades, young mermaids from their tribe come here," Dumbledore whispered. "There are records of this since the time of the 4 great masters. The Sorting Hat even told me that Gryffindor once visited their tribe and seemed to have left something behind." Ralph narrowed his eyes. "Gryffindor? By the way, where's Professor Lockhart? Should we take him with us?" "No need. I just reassured Professor Lockhart and told him, we'll take him once he's healed." Dumbledore smiled. "No rush. Let him rest here for a few more days, After all, it's a rare opportunity. If it weren't for all the miscellaneous things at Hogwarts, I'd like to keep him here. Chapter 219 The Unusual Percy. At Mercus's urging, Ralph and his companions enjoyed a dinner at the merfolk's village. Although merfolk, like centaurs, refused the Ministry of Magic's classification of them as humans, they were indeed a highly intelligent species similar to wizards, eating cooked food rather than raw meat. Merfolk used a special magical fuel to boil their food and water. The dinner consisted mostly of river delicacies, the best being the squid liver salad, a simple preparation: skin, slice, remove the intestines, mix with cooked wine, and season with salt. Steamed clams and arc shell sashimi were also good, as was the grilled squid, savory with a hint of curry. The ginger and scallion baked crab was fragrant and the crab meat incredibly tender. Ralph ate to his heart's content. During the dinner, there was a merfolk song and dance performance. Although the merfolk were all ugly, their voices were beautiful. You could hear them all with your eyes closed anyway. Mizora was ill, but to express her gratitude, she still attended the dinner and chatted amiably with Ralph. Over the next few weeks, he would have to help her with several follow-up appointments until she was fully recovered. Since Gryffindor, one of the four great masters, was involved, Ralph also began to pay more attention to Myrcella, which was Dumbledore's main reason for bringing her to treat his illness. As for Lockhart, he was just a side effect. Back at Hogwarts, Ralph immersed himself in the library, researching information about mermaids. Mercus called Myrcella a golden mermaid, and she was also a two-tailed mermaid. These two characteristics alone were enough to gather a great deal of information. Sitting in the library, Ralph held a book titled Mermaid Distribution and Types, carefully flipping through it. According to the book, so-called golden mermaids have golden hair and scales, and distinctive double fishtails. They are known for their beauty and live in the Aegean Sea between the Greek peninsula and Asia Minor. Myrcella's ability to swim from the Aegean Sea through the Mediterranean and the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Black Lake was quite impressive. The book also mentions that this tribe has a tradition of guarding an island, using enchanted songs to bewitch seafarers who attempt to reach it, causing them to run aground and sink. Of course, the credibility of this myth is low, as every tribe has similar legends. Jews also firmly believe that God will eventually send a Messiah to restore the Jewish nation. The Celts even say that King Arthur will return as king. Ralph spent several days searching but found no further valuable information. After finishing the last book, he left the library. The boy walked west up the stairs, passing through an arched corridor, where he happened to encounter the twins and Percy. Percy was chasing Fred and George, the three of them running around the pillars, making quite a ruckus. When George saw Ralph, he threw an object at him from a distance. Ralph caught it and looked down to see it was the prefect's badge, but the twins had used magic to change the word idiot on it. Percy changed direction and ran towards Ralph. Fred shouted, "Hurry up and throw it to me, Ralph." The boy didn't throw it. He stood still and waited for Percy to catch up before tossing the prefect badge back to him. "Thanks, Ralph." Percy didn't notice the words on it had been changed. He put the badge back on his chest. Percy calmed his breathing and quickly regained his composure. He straightened his back, fiddled with the badge on his chest, and said sternly, "George, Fred, because of your prank, Gryffindor loses 10 points. I hope this will teach you both a lesson and show you how to respect a good prefect." George and Fred walked away, completely unconcerned. Seeing their expressions, Percy was furious. He shouted, "I'll write to Mum and tell her, your behavior at Hogwarts is so bad, it's already the worst in Gryffindor. You have no sense of honor whatsoever, you're dragging the house down. I'm ashamed of you." Ralph looked at Percy, suddenly remembering Mrs. Weasley. Her tone was exactly the same. "It's not our fault Gryffindor is at the bottom," George retorted loudly. "How many points have we lost? Look at how many points Ron and Harry lost." "That's right," Fred nodded. "They lost at least 400 or 500 points. Compared to them, we're nothing." That wasn't wrong. No one was worth mentioning compared to Harry and Ron. Not long ago, just for feeding Malfoy poisonous mushrooms, the two of them lost 200 points. Most students probably wouldn't lose 200 points in 7 years combined. Others are scoring machines, but Harry and Ron are ruthless deduction machines. Even the twins and Harry are no match for Ron. I'll make sure they both behave themselves lately, and so will you too. Anyway, I'll keep an eye on you," Percy said, then strode away. "How did you get on his good side?" Ron asked curiously. "Percy's got a screw loose," George scoffed. We were just about to mail a letter, and he stopped us, saying the owl house was dangerous because a bird snake was caught there last time. Then can you borrow my owl? Ron suggested. No, your owl will be recognized, Fred grinned mischievously. We have to use the public owl to avoid being spotted. Who are you writing to, being so cautious? Ron raised an eyebrow. A naive little boy who's done something wrong lately and needs encouragement, George laughed. Of course, we seem to have overdone it, making him fall into an unprecedented infatuation. Anyway, this is our greatest pleasure lately, Fred grinned. Are you going to the owl house again later? Ralph asked. Yes, just avoid Percy, Fred chuckled. He's worried we'll play pranks and ruin his chances of becoming student council president. I heard from Ginny that Percy got 12 OWL certificates last year. With that kind of achievement, he's definitely going to be the next student council president, Ralph said non-committally. Even if you play pranks, it won't affect him. Getting 12 OWL certificates is a super academic achievement. Hogwarts hasn't had a student like that for many years. The last one was Bill Weasley. It's hard to say, George shook his head. If it were really that certain, Percy wouldn't be so unhappy. How so? Ralph raised an eyebrow. During the summer, Percy got 12 certificates, but he didn't show off at all, and he didn't seem very happy, George replied. He even locked himself in his room all day and wouldn't come out. What's he doing? Ralph asked curiously. I don't know. We blew up his room, so he had nowhere to sleep for days, Fred laughed. But even so, we couldn't figure out what he was doing hiding in his room all day. Ralph narrowed his eyes. So Percy did seem a bit strange. Could the diary really be in his hands? Chapter 2 will be posted around 1 p.m. P.S. The original book says Percy received 12 OWL certificates, not 12 OS. Outstanding. This is a classic rumor. Some people like to say Percy had 12 O's to belittle Hermione's grades. Passing an A is enough to get a certificate. The standard isn't that high. Similarly, Bill and Barty Crouch Jr. both had 12 certificates. Dumbledore definitely didn't have 12, because he didn't take divination in school. Chapter 220 The Inflated Malfoy. Months ago, Ralph suspected Lockhart was highly suspicious. But after infiltrating the Defense Against the Dark Arts office, he discovered Lockhart had only smuggled a harpy and its eggs, unrelated to Tom's diary. He wasn't at the castle the night Goyle was attacked, having been thrown into the Black Lake by Professor Snape, clearing him of suspicion. Now, Percy seemed more suspicious. He was at Flourish and Blotch that day, making it possible Malfoy had slipped in the book. He'd also left the Great Hall around the time of the Halloween and Valentine's Day dinners. Even the twins thought Percy's behavior was strange. Of course, given Lockhart's experience, Ralph only suspected him, not making any blind certainty without crucial evidence. After saying goodbye to the twins, the boy headed towards the Hufflepuff common room, where he encountered an unexpected person at a corner of the stairs, Draco Malfoy. He'd gone to St. Mungo's Hospital for Magic after Valentine's Day, and hadn't expected to return. Accompanying Draco was a tall man who looked 7 or 8 parts like him, Lucius Malfoy. As they passed each other, Ralph quickened his pace and stepped aside, while Lucius stopped, staring at the boy's retreating figure, and suddenly called out, "Hey, wait a minute, Mr. Scamander." Ralph turned around upon hearing the voice, nodding and asking, "Is there something you need, Mr. Malfoy? I heard from Draco that you stole a lot of his allowance." Lucius glanced at his son. "I think you might have misunderstood. It wasn't stealing, it was purchasing. There's a big difference between the two words," Ralph said calmly with a smile. "Your son has used quite a few services at Mycelia's magical animal shop. I'm taking a certain amount of payment. Is there a problem?" Draco didn't speak, but awkwardly twisted his neck. "Mr. Malfoy, you're not going to say your son was a minor making impulsive purchases and ask me for a refund, are you?" Ralph asked, looking surprised. "That little bit of money is nothing to me," Malfoy sneered. "But I heard from Crabbe that you slapped Draco last semester." "Oh, yes, that's true," Ralph readily admitted. "He called him a mudblood in front of some of my friends, so I'm teaching your son a lesson." Ralph's lips curled into a smile, and he chuckled softly. "Don't mention it, it's a free service." Malfoy's face darkened, and he gripped his cane tightly. The boy narrowed his eyes. If Malfoy really wanted to fight, he would have used the basilisk's petrifying gaze. The boy would have no chance of winning. But Malfoy, perhaps out of fear of Dumbledore, or perhaps out of concern for Newt, ultimately only gripped his cane without making a move. He said coldly, "Mr. Scamander, cherish your last moments at Hogwarts. I will not allow a student who bullied my son to remain in this school, is that so? That's a real shame. I always thought I got along very well with your son. It seems I was just being presumptuous." Ralph blinked and said, "As for expelling me, unfortunately, you're just a school board member, not the headmaster. It's easier to transfer Draco to another school than to expel me." Malfoy smiled, not in a hurry to speak, seemingly preparing his words. After a moment, he slowly said, "Don't be too sure of yourself. Dumbledore won't be in this school for long either. You'll soon be without anyone to back you up. I'll make sure you get expelled like your grandfather, maybe." Ralph shrugged and smiled. "I can get expelled like my grandfather, but you'd better not die suddenly like your father." Malfoy was furious, staring intently at the boy, his eyes blazing with murderous intent. "What did you say? Have you already forgotten that your father contracted dragonpox and died suddenly?" Ralph grinned. "I heard from my grandfather that your father even wrote to him, begging him for help with treatment, but before that, my grandfather had warned your father about the dragonpox. He not only ignored him but also cursed my grandfather, and unfortunately, he died suddenly a few days later." Ralph smiled and said, "You'd better take my advice and go to St. Mungo's Hospital for a few more checkups. Really, don't end up like your father." Malfoy's eyes were cold, and he said with a forced smile, "Sharp tongue, say what you will, but don't forget to go see a doctor." Ralph turned and walked forward, waving and laughing loudly. "Goodbye, Mr. Malfoy." Malfoy took a deep look at the boy's retreating figure, then looked down at the timid Draco. They were the same age, yet the difference was so great. He was immediately furious and said, "I'm leaving." Lucius wrapped himself in his cloak, grabbed Draco, and hurriedly disappeared. He needed to get to St. Mungo's Hospital for a checkup as soon as he got back. Malfoy, a former Death Eater, had managed to escape punishment after Voldemort's downfall and even become one of the 12 Hogwarts Board of Governors. He certainly had some ability, he wasn't just good at making threats. A few days later, a notice was posted at the school, with large bold letters, "Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry Headmaster Dumbledore is old and frail, unable to effectively handle the numerous attacks. After discussion by the Board of Governors, it has been decided to remove him from his position as headmaster, and he will be temporarily replaced by Vice Headmaster Minerva McGonagall." Below was a formal-looking seal, next to neat, cursive signature, "Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry Board of Governors." Students crowded around the notice, somewhat incredulous. Justin, reading the notice, was even more shocked, saying, "Why did the Board of Governors get rid of Professor Dumbledore?" "Yes," Macmillan shook his head and said, "if even Dumbledore can't stop it, who can?" "I feel like I can go home on vacation," Hannah said with a worried look. "Hogwarts isn't safe at all without Professor Dumbledore." The news of Dumbledore's suspension spread throughout the school overnight, and everyone was discussing his departure. Dumbledore had been like a pillar of strength. After he left, fear spread rapidly like never before. Every student in the school seemed anxious and uneasy. Every laugh that echoed in the corridors sounded jarring and eerie, and was quickly suppressed. Malfoy, back at Hogwarts, was quite smug. His father's decision to dismiss Dumbledore had made him somewhat arrogant. Malfoy even felt like Hogwarts was his own home. He strolled around the school every day like a mother hen inspecting her backyard. He even loudly proclaimed to Crabbe that Dumbledore was the worst headmaster, and that even Professor McGonagall would be driven out sooner or later. One lunchtime, in front of the entire school, Malfoy suddenly raised his hand and loudly asked, "Professor Snape, why don't you apply for the headmaster's position?" "Oh, Malfoy, don't say things that are detrimental to unity." Snape sat at the faculty table, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Professor Dumbledore has only been temporarily suspended by the Board of Governors. I dare say he'll be back among us soon." "Yes, that's right," Malfoy said with a smile, "but Professor, if you applied for this position, I suspect Father would vote for you." "I tell Father you're the best teacher here, Professor." The students from the other three houses, except for the Slytherin students, glared at Malfoy. It seemed he also wanted to emulate Professor Lockhart, accidentally fall into the Black Lake, and marry a mermaid. Chapter 221 Auditorium Melee. Malfoy's arrogance is understandable. His father, a member of the Board of Governors, had just forcefully united with the other governors to oust the headmaster, forcing him to leave Hogwarts. The other 11 governors seemed to follow his father's lead as if Hogwarts were a one-man show. The future headmaster, if not a puppet, was probably one of their own, otherwise he wouldn't have gotten the position. This headmaster rotation, this year it's my turn illusion, if you were Malfoy, wouldn't you be arrogant? The fact that he didn't constantly strut around like a crab, flirting with Potter, the unrequited love interest of Gryffindor, was already Malfoy's greatest restraint. But the students of the other 3 houses didn't see it that way. They channeled their resentment over the headmaster's dismissal onto Malfoy. After all, who told him to go around saying that his father had driven Dumbledore away? The young wizards were seething with anger, thinking they'd get their hands on Malfoy sooner or later. And soon, their opportunity arrived. That noon, Colin Creevey hopped into the Great Hall like a rabbit, his legs pressed tightly together as if bound by a rope. The Gryffindor students at the dining table burst into laughter. Hermione, who was eating lunch while studying the potions notebook Rolf had given her, looked up at the scene upon hearing the laughter. The girl raised her wand and broke the spell for Colin, frowning. What happened? Colin spread his legs and quickly thanked Hermione, then trembled as he said, Malfoy, I ran into him in the hallway. He was practicing the leg-locking spell on the students with his wand. That's outrageous, Percy said sternly. School rules prohibit casting spells in hallways, let alone attacking classmates. Which hallway was he in? I'm going to deduct points from him as prefect. Deduct points, huh? He's bullying us, George said unhappily. All you do is deduct points, what can we do? Percy said angrily. Don't even think about playing pranks on Malfoy, that's a good idea, thanks, prefect, Fred grinned. Go find Professor McGonagall, Harry said, changing his tune. Give Malfoy a piece of his mind, Harry, you're no longer the Harry I knew who deducted points like it was nothing, George said disappointedly. Stop it, Fred, I can't make another mistake, Harry said awkwardly. I don't want to be expelled, but we can't just let Malfoy get away with it. Ron, who was repeatedly studying his love letter, interjected when he heard Harry's words. Colin, you have to be brave and confront him. He's always been arrogant, you have no reason to give in to him and let him get away with it so easily. I don't want to be on probation like you, and lose points for Gryffindor. Colin shook his head, looking somewhat like he was about to cry. Oh no, my camera is broken too. Everyone knew that Colin's family wasn't wealthy, his father was a muggle milkman. Ginny was furious. Colin was her little brother, and it was Colin who took the picture of the bird snake last time, which was how she earned her wages from Ron. I'm going to find Malfoy and make him pay you back. Ginny jumped off her chair and turned to walk out of the Great Hall. Ginny, don't go, Percy called out. But Fred and George stopped him, calling out, good job, Ginny. Ginny hadn't even left the Great Hall when she saw Malfoy walking in, accompanied by Crabbe and Pansy. Ginny went over and said softly, hey, you broke Colin's camera. You need to apologize and pay him back. Malfoy coughed lightly, a strange expression on his face, clearly finding Ginny's words skeptical and laughable. None of your business. Get out of the way, I'm making you pay Colin back. Ginny gripped her wand tightly. Malfoy drawled, you're really meddling, you stinking pureblood traitor. Why does your family always hang out with mud? Malfoy started to curse Mudblood, but then remembered something and quickly shut up. He glanced at the Hufflepuff table, saw that Ralph was eating and hadn't noticed, and continued, your family always likes to hang out with shady characters? Want to stand up for someone? Go back to your pigsty. What did you say? Ginny slapped Malfoy on the head. Malfoy was furious. Being hit by Scamander was bad enough, but now he'd been hit by a first-year witch. Did he have no shame? He pulled his wand from his pocket, furious. This isn't over. I'll make sure you know who you hit, you little shrew. But Ginny had already gripped her wand tightly, suddenly raising it towards Malfoy and shouting, petrify. Before Malfoy could react, his arms snapped to his sides, his legs snapped to tension, his entire body stiffening. He swayed a few times before collapsing to the ground with a thud. Draco, Pansy yelled. You bitch, you dared to ambush Draco? Seeing Ginny raise her wand again, Pansy lunged at her, grabbing her red hair tightly. Ginny cried out softly in pain. Let go. George and Fred rushed over, Crabbe blocking them. Don't fight, Percy shouted. I'm the prefect, stop it. But no one paid him any attention, and the situation quickly spiraled out of control. Lee Jordan stood on his chair, raising his arms and shouting, kill Slytherin. Bring back Dumbledore. The Gryffindor students at the dining table chanted indignantly, charging towards the Slytherin students. The Slytherin students, not to be outdone, grabbed food from the table and hurled it at the little lions. A battle was about to erupt, except for Malfoy, who lay stiffly on the ground, speechless, but his eyes still darting around in terror. "Don't step on me," but a size 40 shoe was coming straight for his face, the treads of the sole clearly visible, covered in mud. The entire Great Hall erupted into chaos. What had initially been a fight between Gryffindor and Slytherin quickly spread to Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff, who also joined in, throwing food around. Even Ralph was affected. He was drinking soup when several members of the Slytherin Quidditch team rushed towards him. "Break Scamander's legs first, let's see if he dares to play again," this was Captain Flint's order. Ralph didn't even use magic, he simply picked up a large soup spoon from the bowl and slapped Monta's cheek hard, sending him spinning. Then he swung it down on the second student's forehead, instantly turning it red. The third student didn't dare retaliate and ran, but Ralph caught up, leaped up, and kicked him in the back, sending him crashing into the wall. Painful and frightened, he simply lay there pretending to be dead. Ralph clapped his hands, sat back in his chair, and continued to elegantly sip his hot soup, casually watching others fight. When Professor McGonagall entered the Great Hall, she saw screams, cries of pain, whistles, and shouts all around. "What's going on?" A roasted pumpkin flew over, and Professor McGonagall quickly ducked. Snape, caught off guard, was hit on the head. The pumpkin shattering into pieces. "Sorry, Professor Snape, it was Marcus Flint who smashed it," McGonagall shouted. Slytherin, deduct 10 points. Chapter 222 Dobby, who has the diary? Professor McGonagall's arrival finally stopped a brawl that had spread to all four houses. Such incidents weren't uncommon, some friction among hot-blooded students was normal. The most frequent place for this was Quidditch, where even a little rough play could escalate into a fight. But a full-blown brawl in the Great Hall like this was unprecedented. It was appalling. It was understandable, really. With so many people attacked, the school was shrouded in a stifling atmosphere. It was manageable in the short term, but it had been going on for almost a year, and everyone was like a tightly wound string, desperately needing an outlet. Dumbledore's departure had only added fuel to the fire, so even the slightest thing could ignite it like a powder keg. But fighting was unforgivable, and wasting food was even worse. However, with so many involved, it was impossible to deduct points and put everyone in detention. It would be best to channel that extra energy into studying and chores. Every teacher assigned a mountain of homework, forcing the young wizards to work late into the night. They also had to clean all the washrooms and classrooms in the castle, on behalf of the house elves. The main perpetrators of the brawl, Malfoy and Ginny, faced even more severe punishment. Not only would they incur demerits and solitary confinement, but Malfoy also had to compensate Colin for the camera. Of course, this would have to wait until he was discharged from the hospital. He had been hit by a full-body binding charm, trampled by many people, and suffered multiple fractures. Many students ended up in the school hospital, much to Madame Pomfrey's displeasure. Although most injuries were minor and would heal quickly, the sheer number was overwhelming. Madame Pomfrey couldn't help but complain that the school was too dangerous. Without Dumbledore, such chaos had occurred. In the school hospital, Malfoy lay in bed, holding a quill pen, listing the students he would expel on a piece of parchment. At the very top was Ginny Weasley. Don't be fooled by her antics today, she'll definitely be held accountable later. Once his father gets rid of McGonagall and installs Snape as the new headmaster, he'll expel all these annoying guys. Malfoy secretly vowed. Potter, on the other hand, doesn't need to be expelled. He can transfer to Slytherin and share a dorm room with him. Every night, Malfoy would give Potter a good care, letting him know what it meant to do not disturb a sleeping dragon and dragon ramming. With a creak, the door suddenly opened. Malfoy looked up and a figure slowly materialized in the air. He exclaimed in astonishment, "Scamander, why are you here?" Ralph walked over to Malfoy, sat on the opposite bed, glanced at the list in his hand, and smiled. "I need to talk to you." Malfoy quickly hid the list under his pillow, stammering, "I didn't curse Muddy today, you know." Ralph was completely confused. "What? Nothing?" Malfoy took a breath. "You didn't come to see me about what happened in the Great Hall today, no." Ralph crossed his legs, picked up a banana from the table, peeled it, but instead of handing it to Malfoy, he took a bite himself. "I really do have something to discuss with you." Malfoy suddenly remembered something and hurriedly said in a panic, "About the Chamber of Secrets, I don't know anything. Potter and Weasley asked me about it last time. I really don't know. The shadow of Valentine's Day was too great. Malfoy was truly terrified. He was practically swearing to the heavens that whoever was the attacker, their entire family would die. I'm not asking about that, Malfoy, Ralph said in a deep voice. Get Dobby out here for me. Who? Malfoy looked bewildered. Don't tell me you don't know your own house elf. Ralph raised an eyebrow. Malfoy hesitated. What do you want with him? Ralph didn't reveal the reason, just making something up. I want to ask about a house elf. He might know, is that so? Malfoy frowned. Can Hogwarts summon him? Of course, Ralph smiled, gripping his wand in his sleeve. If Malfoy wasn't willing to cooperate, he wouldn't mind using some special methods. Malfoy really wanted to refuse, but after thinking for a moment, he tentatively called out softly, Dobby, come out. With a cracking sound like a whip, a house elf appeared in the ward. He was wearing a dirty pillowcase, his long fingers were bandaged, and he looked pitiful. Young master, you called for me. Dobby bent over, his mouth almost touching his bumpy toes. Ralph waved his wand and whispered, conviction, a flash of red light, and Malfoy collapsed onto the bed. Ralph didn't want Malfoy to suddenly interfere while he was asking questions, either driving Dobby away or having Dobby attack him. Dobby stared at Ralph with his big, tennis ball-sized eyes, surprised that this student had knocked out his young master. But Dobby didn't do anything, he always obeyed his master's orders, and Draco hadn't given him any orders to protect him. Dobby, I need to talk to you. Ralph narrowed his eyes and smiled. I've heard Harry mention you. He told me everything about you. He said you visited him during the summer holidays and warned him. You're a very good elf. The great Harry Potter praised Dobby like that. Dobby suddenly burst into tears, sobbing loudly, never, never, a wizard has ever said that about me. Turn your ears. Ralph raised his wand again. This spell, from Snape's old textbook, produced a buzzing sound, creating a barrier, effectively preventing Madame Pomfrey from being alerted. I'm Harry's friend, I'm not a bad person, Ralph continued to try to convince Dobby. Harry Potter's friend is certainly not a bad person. Dobby gazed at Ralph with his teary eyes. I've also seen you walking with the great Mr. Harry Potter. He said you know about the Chamber of Secrets, but you can't tell him who opened it, Ralph asked. That's right, Dobby nodded frantically, flapping his big ears. Dobby can't say, sir, Dobby can't say, Dobby can't betray his master, then drink this potion. Ralph pulled a small bottle of clear liquid from his pocket and said softly, 3 drops will do. That won't disobey your master's orders, will it? Dobby took the potion, hesitating. Don't you want to save Harry? He's in danger right now, Ralph said slowly in a seductive voice. Dumbledore has been expelled from Hogwarts. If you drink this, you can save Harry. Trust me. I won't lie to you. Dobby covered his face with his hands, trembling all over. After a moment, he picked up a bottle of truth serum and poured in 3 drops. When Dobby opened his eyes again, his gaze was lifeless. Ralph stared at him and asked, can you hear me? Dobby's eyelids fluttered a few times, and he whispered, yes, I can. I want you to tell me, Ralph said in a low voice, who did Lucius Malfoy give Tom Riddle's diary to? Dobby took a deep, trembling breath, then said in a flat, emotionless tone, that day at Flourish and Blotts, the owner slipped it to Percy Weasley in the chaos. Ralph looked up at the ceiling, the bright light streaming in, and he instinctively squinted. Percy, was it really you? Thanks to Just Love to Wade Through Water, Rain in the Fields, and QQ Reading Reader Genius Deductive Method for their generous donations. Chapter 223 Ralph, you're not hiding in the Gryffindor common room, are you? Malfoy, it's time for your medicine. Malfoy was awakened from his slumber. He groggily opened his eyes and saw Ralph sitting by his bedside with a small bottle, a fatherly smile on his face. Malfoy rubbed his throbbing head and asked, what is this? Madame Pomfrey just brought this medicine, Ralph said softly. Drink it quickly, and your injuries will heal soon. Here, let me feed you. Ralph raised the bottle and forced it into Malfoy's mouth. Malfoy's chest heaved violently as he coughed. Malfoy's eyes glazed over, and he quickly drifted back to sleep. Ralph then vanished again, turning and leaving the room. It wasn't a potion from Madame Pomfrey, of course, but a potion of forgetfulness made from the venom extracted from the egg sac of a winged demon. Winged demon venom, diluted to a specific ratio, could erase terrible memories. Back in New York, the outbreak of the obscurial credence exposed the wizarding world to muggles. Newt helped the Magical Congress of the United States use the properties of the winged demon's venom to unleash a massive forgetfulness rain on the entire city. Over the decades, through continuous exploration and research, Newt has developed various forgetfulness potions using winged demon venom as the main ingredient. Depending on the added materials and venom concentration, it can even erase memories accurate to 10 hours ago, truly an essential remedy for home, travel, murder, and cover-ups. Ralph has studied the forgetfulness charm, but his current usage is mediocre, far less effective than the forgetfulness potion. Not only Malfoy, but Dobby's memories were also erased by Ralph, making him forget tonight's conversation. It's always better to be careful, to prevent Lucius from noticing. Ralph is too cautious. After leaving the ward, the boy returned to the Hufflepuff common room. Lying on his bed, he was still thinking about Dobby's words. According to him, Lucius Malfoy had slipped the diary to Percy during the chaos that day. If it were a twin, Percy did indeed have some strange aspects. Most importantly, he left the Great Hall on both Halloween and Valentine's Day, giving him time to commit the crime. Could it really be Percy? But one thing puzzled Rove. On the night Mrs. Pants was attacked, he had clearly trapped the attacker in the bathroom, creating an absolute locked room. How did the attacker escape? Rove decided to go to Percy's dormitory immediately to search for a diary, lest things get complicated and something else happen tomorrow. However, he didn't plan to go to the Gryffindor common room himself. The entrance was guarded by the fat lady's portrait, and trying to pass through her would easily be discovered. Rove decided to use Easy Walker to infiltrate the animal's consciousness and control it to sneak into the dormitory, simple and convenient. Rove knocked on the box and quickly summoned Botricle. It had just been sleeping and was now extremely sleepy and listless, sitting on the bed, swaying back and forth, then nodding off again. "Wake up, Groat," Rove said, scratching its armpit. Groat opened his eyes, yawned, and made a gurgling sound of confusion. "Let me borrow your body." Ralph pressed his thumb on the Botricle's head. "I'm going in, Groat." This wasn't the first time he'd done this. After several attempts, the initial urgency had worn off, and his consciousness smoothly entered the Botricle's body. The boy controlled the Botricle, riding the Witchbird, and flew out the window, leaving the Hufflepuff common room. In the Gryffindor Tower, a Witchbird hovered by the window. The Botricle jumped onto the windowsill, used its lock-picking talent to open the closed window, and quietly slipped inside. Before finding Dobby, Ralph had already sensed Percy might be suspicious, so he had scouted out his dormitory location beforehand. The few people in the dormitory were all asleep, some were snoring loudly, others were grinding their teeth, and still others were talking in their sleep. Beside Percy's bed was a small desk, piled high with various textbooks, and on its surface lay a worn-out book, How Prefects Gain Power. This was a book about how prefects at Hogwarts became student council presidents and then climbed the ranks in the Ministry of Magic. Although the author had never been a prefect or student council president, only a low-level clerk in the Ministry of Magic, it didn't stop him from sharing his insights. Like self-help books, the authors were generally not so-called successful people. By the moonlight, Ralph carefully searched the room, even checking under Percy's pillow, but unfortunately, just like in Lockhart's office, he couldn't find the diary. Just as Ralph was considering whether to use Truth Potion again, a piercing scream suddenly rang out from afar. Percy was startled awake, and Ralph immediately hid. "What happened?" someone asked. "Aren't you sleeping in the middle of the night?" "I don't know, I'll go check." Percy turned on the light, was about to run out, then turned back, pinned his prefect badge to his pajamas, and hurriedly ran outside. Ralph took the opportunity to jump onto Percy and follow him outside. The screams woke up the students in the boys' dormitory, and everyone opened their doors and looked outside. "Don't come out, stay in the dormitory, I'm the prefect," Percy shouted. But no one listened to him, and they all squeezed towards the dormitory where the noise was coming from. Fred even peeked out and asked, "Is it a pajama party?" "Great, I still have some butterbeer under my bed," George added. "Shut up," Percy glared at the two of them. He quickly ran to a dormitory, and Ralph peeked out and saw Harry, Ron, and Seamus. Harry and Seamus were supporting Ron, whose face was full of terror and fear, and he was pointing tremblingly at the corner of the wall. A figure just ran out. Ralph narrowed his eyes. He saw Dean Thomas lying on the ground, covered in wounds, black smoke billowing from him. "Damn it," Percy gasped. "I'll go tell Professor McGonagall." Percy rushed to the common room. Several witches were still coming out of the girls' dormitory, wearing pajamas and yawning. Who was shouting just now? There's been an attack. Go back to your dorms. Percy ran towards the corridor, urgently saying, I'm going to find Professor McGonagall. The common room fell silent. Everyone was pale. Ralph controlled the boat trickle, jumped off Percy, and was about to search the common room when suddenly he was lifted up, feeling a strong wind whistling past his ears. Ralph looked up and saw the huge Hermione, wearing pink pajamas and with messy hair. She reached out her white hand and grasped him. The girl rubbed Ralph's head with her fingers and whispered, What are you doing here, Grote? Hermione suddenly narrowed her eyes, glanced around suspiciously, and said sharply, Ralph, could he be in the Gryffindor common room too? Chapter 2 Tomorrow morning. Thanks to Just Love to Wonder for the donation. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 224 Hey, come out. Hermione's intuition told her that Ralph was in the Gryffindor Tower, perhaps even hiding in some corner of the common room, secretly watching her. The girl wanted to shout, Hey, come out, but there were other students in the common room. Shouting like that would probably make her seem crazy. Hermione looked around, but even after Professor McGonagall arrived and chased the girls back to their dorms, she still couldn't find Ralph. Hermione climbed the stairs, glancing at the common room one last time, before stuffing the botricle into her own dorm. Ralph was speechless. His consciousness was attached to the botricle, and its small body was like a monster facing Ultraman, completely dominated by Hermione. Hermione quickly lay back down on her bed, drew the curtains, and pulled the botricle out again, placing it in front of her face. The girl ruffled Ralph's hair, teasing him with her fingers like a pet. A little tired of playing, Hermione placed Ralph beside her pillow and carefully covered him with a handkerchief. The girl chuckled, All right, sleep here tonight. Tomorrow I'll return you to your irresponsible owner. Behave yourself, don't run around, don't wander off. Good night. Ralph lay frozen on the pillow, watching the girl beside him close her eyes and fall asleep. He could still hear her soft breathing. A dozen minutes later, Ralph's consciousness left the botricle and returned to his own body. The escaper's duration was limited, he could only maintain it for a maximum of 40 minutes. The boy sighed softly in bed. The duration was still too short, he had to practice more, otherwise, wouldn't this interfere with his daily exploration work? The next morning, Ralph had just entered the Great Hall when he saw Hermione sitting at the Ravenclaw table, whispering with Sherry. Upon seeing the boy, she quickly waved. Ralph walked slowly over and sat down at the Ravenclaw dining table. Hermione, impatient, interrogated him. Where were you last night? Ralph poured himself a glass of milk and feigned ignorance, saying, I was in my dorm. What's wrong? Stop pretending. Look at this. Hermione pointed to a botricle sitting on the table eating. Grote barked twice at the boy, sounding aggrieved. You always carry Grote with you, yet it appeared in the Gryffindor common room last night. And you still say you didn't go anywhere? Hermione and Sherry stared at him, seemingly wanting to see how he would deny it. Of course, Ralph couldn't admit that his consciousness had been in Grote's body last night, and that he had even lain on someone's pillow for a while. He was still young and didn't want to be hacked to death. The boy, who had prepared his explanation beforehand, lowered his voice and said, Last night I sent Grote to the Gryffindor common room to monitor a student. How did it end up at your place? Monitoring a student? That's right, Ralph nodded. I went to the school hospital, took the truth serum to Malfoy, and asked him about the Chamber of Secrets and the attackers, and what happened. Both girls perked up their ears. Malfoy really doesn't know who the attacker is, Ralph said in a low voice. I had him summon his house elf, Dobby, and gave him a truth serum. Dobby told me that it was all Lucius Malfoy's doing. He gave a black diary to Percy Weasley. Percy, Hermione said incredulously. He's a prefect. That's unlikely, Hermione. That diary has dark magic on it. Ralph didn't explain in too much detail, only saying softly, it can bewitch the holder. Then let's go find Professor McGonagall and tell her about it, Hermione said seriously. There was another attack in Gryffindor last night, and Dean Thomas was injured. Is that so? Ralph said oh, and then calmly said, let's see what Grote has to say. It was watching Percy last night, Ralph moved closer to the botricle, pretending to listen for a while, then said gravely, "This is bad. What is it?" "Gro told me that it couldn't find the diary in Percy's dormitory last night. Maybe it's hidden somewhere else, but Percy was sleeping in his dorm when Dean was attacked." Ralph shrugged. Sherry and Hermione exchanged a glance and fell silent. In that case, Percy was basically ruled out. He used Truth Potion, so Dobby couldn't possibly be lying. Sherry thought for a moment and said softly, "The diary was either lost by Percy Weasley or he gave it away. Giving it away would be easier to handle, but losing it by accident would be troublesome. Who knows where he lost it?" Hermione was silent for a moment, then offered, "Guessing like this isn't going to work. Shall I go ask Percy?" "Sure," Ralph nodded. A moment later, Hermione trotted back and said, "Percy said he did see a black diary during the summer holidays with Tom Riddle's name on it. He saw that name on the list of past student leaders and in the prize room, so he didn't throw it away, thinking he'd bring it back to school, but it suddenly disappeared in the last few days of summer, so it was lost at their house." Ralph narrowed his eyes. He felt he was close to uncovering the truth, but he was missing one last piece of evidence. The news of Dean Thomas's attack plunged the entire school into an eerie silence. In the past, everyone thought that only lone wizards were attacked, and that staying in the common room was safe. But no one expected that even sleeping in the dormitory at night could lead to trouble. Where was the safety of Hogwarts then? Suddenly, everyone was on edge, and everyone was scrambling to book train tickets, waiting for the Easter holidays to take the express train home. Some students even wanted to take a long leave and not return for a while, and even then, Professor McGonagall approved. She even considered closing the school and switching to online classes using the fireplace. For safety, even the journey from the castle to the greenhouse was escorted by teachers. After potions class, Snape yelled at the class, "Hurry up, I'm taking you all to herbology class." Then, the students left the classroom in two lines, crossed a vegetable garden, and headed towards the greenhouse. The atmosphere in herbology class was very oppressive. Although the nearly ripe mandrakes seemed to be laughing and twittering, no one paid them any attention. Professor Sprout didn't say much either, only anxiously instructing everyone to prune the wrinkled Abyssinian figs. It was a very simple task, something to lighten the mood a little. After class, Professor Sprout escorted the students back to the castle. Ralph left the group and went to the school hospital on the second floor, to the washroom where Mrs. Pants had been attacked, intending to check it again. He stood at the door and suddenly heard a clattering sound coming from inside. Chapter 225 The location of the diary. Since Mrs. Pants was attacked, this washroom has been temporarily closed and few people come here. Why is there a sound now? Ralph raised his wand and carefully entered the washroom, where he saw a large puddle of water seeping out from under the door of the cubicle. He gently pushed open the wooden door of the stall and found Myrtle upside down, her head submerged in the toilet water, legs up, tongue lolling out, mouth crooked and eye squinting. "What are you doing in that position, Myrtle?" Ralph leaned against the wooden door and couldn't help but laugh. "Playing the water ghost, or practicing your land swimming device." Myrtle quickly flipped over and floated in midair, saying, "Ralph, how did you get in here? This is the women's restroom. I've noticed you particularly like going into the women's restroom. Is this your unique fetish? Although it's a bit perverted, but," Myrtle said shyly, "I don't mind. First of all, this restroom is no longer in use. No female students come here. Secondly," Ralph said slowly, "I heard a banging noise and came in to check if anyone had been attacked. It's understandable. I didn't say you were deliberately spying on me." Myrtle winked at him through her thick glasses. "Don't be so tense. What are you doing here?" Ralph stood in the doorway of the cubicle, looking around and frowning slightly. "Aren't you always in that other old, abandoned washroom? This is my new territory." Myrtle floated in the toilet tank, chin in hand, and said, "The old one. After the floor was burned, the smell always seeped up through the pipes. It was awful. After Voldemort used the fiend fire spell to burn down the Chamber of Secrets last year, the strange smell could indeed be smelled for a long time, but," Ralph teased, "you, a ghost, can smell something burned." Hearing this, tears suddenly welled up in Myrtle's eyes. "Ralph, you're hurting me with your words. I know I'm dead. I can't breathe. You don't need to remind me like this." "Why, Myrtle, you're too sensitive," Ralph said helplessly. "Sensitive? That's because nobody really cared about me." Myrtle burst into tears, clutching her hair and sobbing. "When I died, it took everyone a long time to notice. Nobody cared about me at all. Don't cry, Ralph said, glancing at the door. We'll disturb Mrs. Pomfrey, she's not known for her good temper. I won't cry, but you have to come visit me more often. I haven't seen you in ages since Halloween, Myrtle muttered, fumbling for a handkerchief in her robe. Don't you already have boyfriends? Harry and Ron. Ralph glanced around the bathroom and replied casually, 2 of them, aren't they enough to make you happy? Ron is too ugly. Just looking at his face covered in freckles makes me sick. Harry has no romance and is a heartless little bastard. Myrtle wiped her eyes sadly. I've decided to dump them. Of all the male students at Hogwarts, you're the best looking one, good enough for me. Did you and Mrs. Grey break up too? I haven't seen you 2 together in ages. Ralph didn't want to talk about Helena, so he quickly changed the subject. What was that sound just now? I heard it from the doorway. A fat, greasy rat, Myrtle said in a pitiful voice. It looked terrifying, scurrying around in the stalls, and finally crawling out of the toilet. I'm terrified of rats. It's okay, it won't bite you anyway. You're hurting me again, Myrtle sobbed mournfully, rising into the air, spinning, and plunging headfirst into the toilet, splashing water onto the floor before disappearing. Judging from the muffled sobs, she must have been hiding in the sewer. Ralph didn't seem to care. He turned to leave, but after only a few steps, he suddenly remembered something, stiffened, and turned back, staring intently at an object in the stall. The boy suddenly laughed. He had discovered something that he and even Dumbledore had inadvertently overlooked, the toilet. The night Mrs. Pants was attacked, Ralph had used water to seal the walls, seemingly creating a sealed room, but it wasn't truly sealed. The toilet was connected to the sewer, wasn't it? The opening was just too small for Ralph to notice at the time. But even small, it was still a hole, big enough for a rat to squeeze in. No wonder that guy rushed into the stall immediately. He was trying to crawl into the toilet. Now only one thing remained to be determined. How did the diary end up in that guy's hands after Percy's? Ralph turned and walked out of the bathroom, striding towards the distance. He crossed corridors and buildings, quickly reaching the 4th floor before slowing his pace. Because of her fight with Malfoy, Ginny was being punished by manually cleaning the corridor. She was currently standing on a ladder, meticulously wiping the windows with a rag. Luna stood on the ground, holding the ladder for Ginny. She carried a bucket of water in her left hand, a clean rag draped over her right arm, and a string of pebbles around her waist, jingling softly. A copy of the Quibbler sat on the windowsill, but the breeze ruffled the pages, obscuring the contents. Ralph walked towards them, offering Ginny his left hand to hold the ladder while his right hand helped Luna turn the pages of the Quibbler. Ralph, what brings you here? Ginny asked, the windows creaking as she wiped them. I want to ask you something. Ginny quickly slid down the ladder, tilting her head back and glancing around deliberately before lowering her voice. Asking for information costs money. Amused and exasperated, Ralph gave her a light tap on the head and whispered, Ginny, George and Fred told me that Percy locked himself in his room during the summer. I know what Percy was doing. Ginny quickly raised her hand holding a rag, grinning. He's dating Penelope Crivard, the prefect of Ravenclaw, and he's been hiding in his room writing her letters all summer. Ralph paused, realizing that wasn't what he wanted to ask, but it did explain Percy's unusual behavior. So, he left the Great Hall on Halloween and Valentine's Day to go on dates. Yes, Ginny nodded. He also told me not to tell anyone. Ralph hummed, then hesitated for a moment before saying, I have something else to ask you. What is it? George and Fred told me they blew up Percy's room, leaving him without a place to sleep for several days. Ralph said softly, where did Percy sleep then? He shared a room with Ron and Harry. Ginny said matter-of-factly. Our house only has 5 rooms. I have one. Mom and Dad have one. George and Fred have one. Percy had nowhere to sleep, so he had to share a small attic room with Ron. So, that's when that guy found the diary? Why are you asking this? Ginny asked curiously. Nothing, thank you. Ralph smiled contentedly. He had sorted out all the doubts. The boy took out a galleon from his pocket, but then remembered he was also poor and had to support his little helper, Sherry. So he couldn't be extravagant. He then exchanged the galleon for 2 nuts. Ralph handed Nate to Ginny and Luna respectively, a generous expression on his face. He smiled and said, this is your reward, little kids, take it and buy some candy, don't be shy. Chapter 2 tomorrow morning. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.